The day the captain fired me, the guild hall smelled like rust and bad oil. Gray stood at the head of the long table with his arms crossed, Lila on his left and Borg on his right. The three of them freshly back from a contract that paid enough to make a man generous. He was not generous. He told me I was done, effective immediately, and then he explained why, slowly, the way you explain to a child. Firepower. That was the word he kept coming back to. The party was called Crimson Fang, he reminded me, and Crimson Fang sold explosions. Beautiful, camera-ready explosions that clients lined up for. And my magic. He paused here, genuinely searching. What was it again? Temperature control. Right. The life magic that warmed drinks and cooled bathwater. Too plain for customer appeal, he said. And Lila laughed at that. And Borg laughed because Lila laughed. And I let him finish his speech because interrupting would have made it longer. The timing was not random. They had just landed a desert crossing escort contract, the kind that paid in bars of gold. And Gray figured a job like that was pure combat. No equipment maintenance needed. He was wrong about that. But I was not going to be the one to teach him. I asked for severance. He expected me to name a number. I asked for the broken three-wheeled wagon in the back lot and the pile of scrap iron nobody had touched in 6 months. Gray blinked. Then he laughed and waved me out. Take it. I did. The scrap pile weighed about as much as I did, and the wagon listed hard to the left where the third wheel had cracked, and the afternoon sun hit me like opening an oven door. I pulled the whole mess out through the guild's back gate and onto the market road, and I felt something settle under my ribs that took me half a block to name. Relief. The same bone-deep relief I remembered from quitting a black company in my past life. 20 years and 1 death ago. Not anger, not humiliation, just the quiet exhale of a man who had been holding his breath inside someone else's operation for too long and could finally stop. I had annealed Gray's favorite greatsword last week, stress-cycled Borg's plate armor the week before that, kept Lila's catalyst rod from cracking under desert thermals for 3 straight contracts. None of them had noticed. None of them would notice until the first night in the scorching wasteland when the metal started failing and there was nobody to ask why. But that was their problem now. I had a wagon with 3 bad wheels and a heap of scrap iron, and somewhere in this city there was a job worth doing. 20 minutes later, in an alley off the market, I found my first 2 employees. They were sitting against the wall between a stack of rotting crates and a drain that smelled worse than the crates. The older one was about 10, thin, arms wrapped around her younger sister, who was maybe 6. Both of them were filthy. Both of them were doing magic. A group of young adventurers passed the mouth of the alley while I stood there with my wagon, swords on their hips, nowhere important to be. One of them pointed. Cotton candy and soap bubbles, he said. 0 attack power. Garbage skill sisters. The other one said they could not even be bait for monsters. They laughed and kept walking. The older girl pulled her sister closer and did not look up. I watched. The older sister was spinning a tuft of something pink between her fingers, absently, the way a person fidgets when they are trying not to think about being hungry. I watched the tuft compress under her thumb and rebound instantly. Full elasticity, no deformation, no tearing. That was not cotton candy. That was high-grade impact absorption, bubble wrap on a molecular level. The younger one blew a soap bubble the size of her own head. It drifted to the alley wall and hit the rough stone and did not pop. It sat there, iridescent, holding its shape against an edge that should have shredded it. Reinforced surface tension, airtight seal. That was vacuum packaging. My head clicked the way it used to click in the warehouse when 2 separate pallets turned out to be one solution. Impact absorption, vacuum sealing, and temperature control. Cushioned, sealed, and frozen. The 3 of us could transport fresh fish across a continent, deliver glass without a crack, and ship wine that arrived cold. Nobody in this world had done that. Nobody in this world had thought to try. I left the wagon at the mouth of the alley and walked in. The older girl saw me coming and shifted her body to shield her sister. I stopped. I knelt in the dirt about 2 arm lengths from them, so I was at her eye level and not above it. My name was Kent, I said, a transporter. If they helped me with my work, I would feed them the best meal they had ever eaten tonight. She stared at me. She had the eyes of a child who had heard offers before and learned what they cost. I reached into the scrap pile on the wagon and pulled out a chunk of raw iron the size of my fist. I held it up where they could see it. Then I pushed my magic into it. The iron went cold, past the point where frost blooms on the surface, and past the point where the frost turns white, and past the point where the white goes still. I pushed the temperature down to the floor of what physics allows, the place where molecular motion stops. And the chunk in my palm became something the world has no good word for. Perfectly silent, perfectly dead. I closed my hand. The iron shattered like glass. The shards rang on the cobblestones around my boots, and the sound hung in the alley for a second before the afternoon swallowed it. The older girl's mouth was open. "Your magic is amazing," she said. I told her it was useful, like hers, like her sister's. "Really?" She blinked. "They all said ours is garbage." I told her they were wrong and that I needed exactly what she could do, and that dinner was first. The younger one tugged her sister's sleeve. "Lulu is hungry." The older girl looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once and stood up and pulled her sister to her feet. Her name was Mina. The small one was Lulu. They followed me back to the wagon. 3 dismissed people and a pile of scrap metal. It was not much of a company, but it was mine. The merchant guild leader was a man who sweated through his collar, even when the room was cool. His office smelled like old paper and the ghost of every fish deal that had gone sour in it. I told him I could deliver crystal salmon fresh to the royal capital. He laughed. Crystal salmon began decaying the moment it left the water, he explained, as if I had not just said the word fresh. Half a day until it rotted. 3 days by carriage to the capital. That was why the fish could only be sold dried. Common sense. Known quantities. I told him I would deliver it at sashimi grade. I told him the fee was 100 gold coins. He stopped laughing. He called it a bad joke and told me 100 gold was an S-rank contract fee. He asked how I planned to do it. Teleportation magic? Trade secret. He leaned back and folded his arms and looked at me the way men look at a bet they want to take but cannot justify. So I gave him the justification. I told him the salmon were scheduled for disposal anyway. Dead cargo. I would stake everything I owned and my own person as penalty for failure. If the fish rotted, he could send me to the mines. He thought about that for exactly the amount of time it took him to calculate that he had nothing to lose. "Fine," he said. "Do what you like." I thanked him and walked out with a contract for 100 gold and a deadline that the entire logistics infrastructure of this world said was impossible. I fed the girls first. A real meal. Bread, stew, 2 portions of grilled meat, and a fruit tart Lulu held with both hands like it might escape. Mina ate fast and pretended she was not crying. Lulu ate slow and did not pretend anything. When they were done, I showed them the wagon and the scrap and told them what we were building. The work took me through the night. Shrink fitting is a technique from a world these two had never heard of. You heat a hole in one piece of metal until it expands. 800 degrees does it. And you slide a cold shaft into the gap. Then you cool the whole assembly past -100. The metal contracts, the joint locks. No welds, no bolts. Permanent. My hands did the heating and the cooling. The scrap pile became axles, a frame, a cargo box, and the housing for something that does not exist in this world. A Stirling engine. It runs on the temperature difference between 2 chambers. In this case, the cargo bay frozen to -20 and the warm evening air on the other side of the wall. Heat flows from hot to cold. I gave it a path. The path turned a shaft. The shaft turned the wheels. By midnight, the frame was solid. By the small hours, the engine housing was seated. Mina watched from a crate, then stopped watching and started helping, lining the cargo bed with her cotton magic, layer after layer of pink elasticity that would absorb any bump the road could throw. Lulu sealed each crystal salmon in a bubble the size of a melon. Airtight, iridescent, perfect. 30 fish wrapped and loaded before dawn. The engine caught with a low rhythmic hum that I felt in my back teeth. The waste heat from the cargo bay fed it. The colder the fish stayed, the harder the engine ran. A closed loop, nearly perpetual. By the time the sky turned gray, the broken wagon and the scrap iron were gone. In their place was a horseless carriage with iron wheels, a sealed metal cargo box, 2 child-sized seats in the front cabin, and a Stirling engine ticking under the hood like a second heartbeat. Magic refrigerated truck, prototype number 1. I set the cabin temperature to a comfortable level for the girls and checked the cargo one last time. 30 salmon, frozen, cushioned, sealed. The gauges read green. Townspeople gathered at the loading bay entrance. A few pointed, a few backed away. Something about an iron monster. The merchant guild leader was there too, arms crossed, mouth open, saying nothing useful. "Hold on tight," I told Mina and Lulu. Mina grabbed the dash rail. Lulu grabbed Mina. I released the brake. The truck rolled forward, gained speed, passed the last house on the port road, and hit the open highway at a pace this world had never seen on dry land. In the side mirror, a flat of polished metal I had mounted as an afterthought. The port town shrank behind us like a memory someone was taking back. The truck cruised at 60 kilometers per hour. Horse carts on this road manage 10 on a good day. We passed 3 of them in the first hour. The drivers stared. Mina pressed her face against the side window. "The trees are flying, Uncle Kent." "That is just your frame of reference moving," I said. She laughed anyway. Lulu had fallen asleep against her sister's shoulder with fruit tart crumbs still on her cheek. The engine hummed. Cargo at -20. Stable. The fallen tree appeared around a bend. I reversed the engine's heat differential against the cold reservoir, and the truck's speed bled off in 4 clean seconds. Regenerative braking. The girls lurched forward. Lulu woke up, and the truck stopped 10 meters short of a pine trunk that had been cut, not blown down. The saw marks were fresh. 10 men stepped out of the tree line. Leather armor, rusted swords. The one in front was the biggest and carried a great sword that he probably thought was impressive. Mina grabbed my arm. "Uncle Kent, stay in the cabin," I said. "Both of you, this is a 3-minute job." I stepped out without a weapon, had not owned one in 42 years across 2 lives, and was not planning to start now. The bandit leader told me to leave the cargo if I valued my life. I told him he had 30 seconds to leave the road. He did not appreciate the counteroffer. He swung the great sword at my head. I raised my left palm. The steel entered the space between my hand and my face, and in that half second, I pushed the blade through 800 degrees on the upstroke and -100 on the downstroke. Thermal shock. The crystalline structure fractured along every grain boundary at once, and the sword shattered mid-swing into a spray of shards that rained around my boots like broken glass. The bandit leader stood there with an empty hilt and an expression I have seen on middle managers who just lost a quarterly report. His men charged. I pressed my palm to the road surface and froze every drop of moisture in the dirt across a 10-meter radius. Black ice, instantly, under 10 pairs of boots that were not designed for it. They went down like dominoes. One of them slid into the ditch. Another grabbed a tree root and hung on with the dignity of a man who knows the universe has made a joke at his expense. I walked to the fallen tree, palm against the trunk. I brought a single point inside the wood to the boiling temperature of trapped water. The sap flashed to steam. The trunk blew apart from the inside into a spray of wood chips that settled across the road like confetti. Total elapsed time by the watch in my vest pocket. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. 20 seconds under the promise. The bandits were already running. The one in the ditch was crawling. I did not watch them go. "Uncle Kent is amazing," Mina said from behind the dash rail, eyes wide. Lulu clapped. The sword went shatter. I told them it was obstacle removal. I checked the gauges. Cargo at -20. Stable. Engine pressure nominal. Forward clear. I released the brake. The truck rolled over the sawdust and back onto the open road. The forest gave way to farmland. The farmland gave way to the long, straight highway, and the afternoon sun sat on the horizon like a gold coin someone had left on the edge of a table. Mina leaned out the window and let the wind hit her face. Lulu pressed her nose to the glass and watched the fields blur past. Behind us, the port town. Ahead, the capital. Inside the truck, 30 fish and 2 employees who had been eating out of alley trash this time yesterday. Kent Transport, first run, on schedule. The Capitol gate guards aimed their spears at us until I showed the Port Town Guildmaster's transport permit. They led us through the way a man lets a stray dog through his yard, sideways, watching. The gourmet merchant was waiting at the back entrance of his restaurant, arms folded, mouth set in the particular frown of a man who has paid for a miracle and expects a scam. 3 days from port to capital, crystal salmon, sashimi grade. He told me, politely, that he did not believe it. I pulled the cargo lever. Cold mist poured out of the compartment and rolled across the loading dock like a slow fog. Mina climbed up first. "Unloading start." She peeled the cotton cushioning back layer by layer. Lulu touched each bubble seal, and the iridescent film dissolved on contact, releasing fish that had not seen air since the port. The merchant picked up a salmon with both hands. He pressed his thumb into the flesh. His frown changed shape. He cut a sliver with a knife he carried in his apron and put it in his mouth and stood there for a long time with his eyes closed. "Firmer than fresh," he said. The flavor was deeper. He could not explain it. Low temperature aging. I did not explain the enzyme chemistry. I told him the cold did the work. He paid 100 gold coins. Then he added 20 as a bonus, not generosity. He wanted exclusive future contracts, and a bonus reads as a deposit on loyalty. I noted this and said nothing. A dozen other merchants swarmed the truck before I closed the cargo door. I told them Kent Transport would open an office. They could wait. That evening, I took Mina and Lulu to a grill restaurant in the lower district. Mina ordered 3 plates. Lulu held a skewer of meat in each hand and declared them both hers. I sat across from them and felt something I had not expected, the small, unearned satisfaction of a man whose work made someone close his eyes and go quiet. On the walk home, Mina held my left hand. Lulu was asleep on my back, her weight settling exactly on the spot where my spine had been filing complaints for 20 years. I resigned from the Adventurers Guild the next morning. Transporter, that was the word now. The unrotting fish rumor spread 3 times faster than I had planned. The Merchant Guild leaked the story to draw clients to his restaurant, and within a week, every food trader in the capital wanted Kent Transport on retainer. Orders piled on the desk. Mina packed. Lulu sealed. I loaded. A 60-kilogram wine barrel did it. I bent, gripped the rim, and something in my lower back made a sound like a dry branch cracking underfoot. My legs went numb from the waist down. Mina ran over and wrapped my waist in cotton so tight I could barely breathe. And for the next 3 deliveries, I moved like a man wearing a corset made of candy floss and regret. The truck sank into mud on a rain-soaked road outside the capital the same week. I froze the puddle solid in 2 seconds, drove out on a platform of ice, and did not mention to the girls that the jolt of climbing out had sent a white flash of pain from my tailbone to my teeth. That night, alone in the empty office, I wrote a job poster. Extremely strong. Delicacy not required. 3 meals with meat. Good daily pay. I pinned it to the Adventurer Guild board on my way home and stood there in the lamplight for a moment, one hand on my back, thinking about forklifts. The next morning, I sat on a bench in the guild lobby and watched 10 muscular men audition for the job. Each one lifted my test crate. Each one dropped it with a thud that rattled the windows. The 10th one cracked the lid. I rejected all of them. My back had opinions about staying on that bench. I ignored them. On the far wall, past the notice board, past the quest sheets and the bounty lists, a woman in a faded night uniform was peeling her own job listing off the cork. She did it slowly, with the care of someone removing a bandage she already knew covered nothing underneath. Silver hair in a ponytail, eyes on the floor, the posture of a person who was about to walk out of this building and not walk into another one. I crossed the lobby. She did not look up. "That poster," I said. "What does it say?" Her voice was flat. She told me she had given up. Her magic was weight reduction. She could make objects as light as feathers. Her night order had exiled her for it. A weightless sword could not pierce armor. They called it a cotton sword. She said the words the way you say a diagnosis you have stopped arguing with. My head clicked. 0 mass meant 0 damage. That was true. 0 mass also meant 0 load weight. A 60-kilogram barrel becomes nothing. A 200-kilogram steel beam becomes a feather. The truck's suspension limit becomes a suggestion. And if you swung a weightless greatsword at top speed and canceled the spell at the exact moment of impact, mass returns, all of it instantly. The kinetic energy would be apocalyptic. A nail gun the size of a building. I told her she was hired. She looked at me for the first time. I walked her to the warehouse without discussing salary. I pointed at the wine barrel that had broken my back. She touched it with 2 fingers and lifted it with 1 hand, and the barrel floated off the ground without a sound. "Big sister is a circus performer," Mina clapped from the doorway. Lulu stood beside her, cheering. I pointed at the 200-kilogram steel beam leaning against the wall. Beatrice placed her palm on it and set it on the truck bed, the way you set a teacup on a saucer. I handed her a second beam. I did not hand her a compliment. I told her, quietly, that there was a combat application she had not been shown, that a weightless sword at full speed with the spell canceled on impact would hit harder than anything her night order had ever fielded. She listened. She did not understand the second sentence. She would later, in a place neither of us could picture yet. Her chin dropped, her shoulders shook. She knelt on the warehouse floor and pressed her forehead toward the ground. "I will serve you as your forklift, master." The words came through tears. "Until the day I am no longer needed." I told her that day was not on the schedule. Then I told Mina to show Beatrice where we kept the good tea. 2 months in, the king summoned me to court. The royal apology was brief. Every good piece of land near the capital had belonged to noble families for generations. What remained was the scorching wasteland south of the city, a strip of cracked earth where the ground temperature hit 45 degrees and nothing grew. The nobles in the gallery laughed. One of them said something about giving a transporter a desert and calling it a gift. I thanked the king politely and drove out the same afternoon. The team complained for the first hour. Mina said she was melting. Lulu asked for ice cream. Beatrice, still in her faded night uniform, asked if I was serious about building here. I told her to wait. The wasteland floor was 45 degrees, 2 meters underground. The rock held at a steady 15, a 30-degree differential. In my past life, that was a geothermal heat pump waiting to happen. In this life, it was the same thing with better insulation. Beatrice carried steel beams that should have required a crane. She drove foundation piles with her sword hilt, and the ground barely felt them at near zero mass. Mina filled wall cavities with dense cotton for insulation. Lulu sealed every window frame and door gap with double bubble film until the building's air leakage dropped to almost nothing. I welded every metal joint by heating both surfaces to the point where atoms migrated freely across the boundary. Molecular diffusion bonding, no rivets, no bolts. One seamless frame. The geothermal heat pump went in under the foundation. 2 weeks from first shovel to last seal. The interior thermometer read 24 degrees. Outside, 45. I served cold barley tea on the porch. "Welcome to Frozen Station." Beatrice lowered her cup. "I take back what I said about this place, Master. This may be happier than returning to the Night Order." Lulu held up her cup. "Lulu wants more." Then I drew the next blueprint. A 20-meter trailer built from ruined steel beams and salvaged monster armor plates, bonded at the atomic level. Beatrice's throne seat behind the cab, where she sat and held the entire frame at near zero weight while it was moving. The Gigafrost, 3 weeks from blueprint to test drive. We loaded 300 tons of rock. The trailer accelerated like nothing this world had a name for, and it floated over a mud pit on minimal ground pressure because something that weighs tens of kilograms does not sink. Sarah, a quiet applicant who had answered a separate job posting, joined around the same time to manage the office. She stayed at the station when the truck rolled out, signed invoices, kept the desk from disappearing under paper. I did not describe her to the girls. She described herself by being there every time we came back. Frozen Station, the Gigafrost, a team of 5. The nobles were still laughing. I was not keeping score. A week after the Gigafrost test drive, we were eating hot pot in the kitchen. Beatrice had made a broth that was better than it had any right to be. Lulu was blowing on a piece of pork. Beatrice set down her chopsticks. "Master, they're coming." I listened. Nothing. But Beatrice heard footsteps the way a former knight hears footsteps, through the ground, before the air catches up. 30 armed men, she estimated. Torches. A merchant guild whose delivery profits I had been undercutting by an order of magnitude had hired them on a flat fee. The contract specified the base as the target. I sighed. I finished my soup. I walked outside. The desert was dark. The torches were close. I pressed my palm to the sand and froze every drop of subsurface moisture across a 50-meter radius, then laid a thin film of water on top and let the night air skin it to a mirror finish. Frictionless. The thugs charged. The first rank hit the ice, and their boots went out from under them like someone had pulled a rug. The second rank ran into the first. The third rank tried to stop and could not. 30 men became a heap of limbs and dropped torches, and language I will not repeat, sliding across the ice toward the base's front wall at a speed governed entirely by their own momentum and the total absence of friction. Beatrice walked through them. Her sword weighed nothing. She moved it the way you move a conductor's baton. 1 pass, 2 passes, 3, and every weapon in the pile flew out of every hand and landed in a neat row behind her. She had not broken skin. She had not needed to. "Lulu! Mina!" I called through the open kitchen door. "Packing job!" Lulu came out blowing a bubble the size of her torso. She sealed the first thug inside it, a grown man floating 3 inches off the ground in an iridescent sphere, hammering at walls that would not break. Mina injected cotton through a small slit until he stopped moving. They worked through the pile in pairs. Bubble, cotton, seal. I labeled the first capsule. Caught red-handed for robbery and vandalism. Handle with care. Cash on delivery. 30 capsules. I loaded them onto the Gigafrost and shipped them to the Royal Guard checkpoint that night. The guard captain paid the delivery fee out of the thugs' own seized purses. 3 days later, a traveling merchant stopped by for shaved ice. He was a regular, the kind of man who showed up whenever the road brought him close enough to justify the detour. He sat on the porch and scraped his spoon across the ice, and told me, between bites, that Crimson Fang was falling apart. Gray's greatsword had snapped mid-battle. The party's potions had separated and gone useless. Infighting. The merchant called them mangy dogs and asked for more syrup. I said nothing. I had annealed that greatsword nightly for 3 years to reset the metal fatigue. Without me, the steel had been quietly degrading for 2 months. The potions needed precise storage temperatures I had maintained without being asked. Crimson Fang's legendary gear was not legendary. It was maintained, and the maintenance man had been fired for being too plain. That same evening, the communication crystal on the station desk lit up. An Adventurers Guild emergency broadcast. The border fortress was suffering an unnatural heat wave, 48 degrees and climbing. Soldiers and stationed adventurers were dehydrating. Request urgent. Ice, cold water, cooling supplies. Highest pay grade. I read the request twice. Crimson Fang was stationed at that fortress. Beatrice was already standing. Master, loading is ready. Her eyes had not wavered. Mina put her fist over her heart. Aye, sir. Lulu tilted her head. Should we bring shaved ice? I told them we would deliver the finest ice those dried out men had ever seen. The Gigafrost was loaded by midnight. Beatrice took her seat and the trailer went light. The engine caught. We rolled out of Frozen Station's loading bay before sunrise, headlights cutting 2 clean lines into the dark desert ahead. Behind us, the base shrank to a point of light against the sand. Ahead, a border fortress full of men who had fired a man for being too plain, dying of a heat they could not control. I had not said the word revenge. I was a transporter. This was a delivery, the highest paying emergency in my queue. And if the cargo happened to be ice, and the destination happened to be the place where Crimson Fang was stationed, and the look on their faces when a 20-meter refrigerated truck rolled out of the heat haze was going to be the most satisfying invoice I had ever written, well, that was just good business. The desert swallowed the last light of the station behind us. Ahead, the road was dark and straight, and ours. I had tried 3 magic tool shops in the city before accepting that the tool I needed did not exist. No sensor on the market could function inside the sand corridor. The sand particles were too fine, the wind speeds too high, and the ambient magical interference from the border's heat signature jammed everything crystal-based within the first 60 seconds. The guild had stamped the delivery as impossible. The border fortress was still dying. I was walking back to the truck through a tight alley off the market district when the foot came down. A drunk in a stained cloak aimed a kick at a small figure crouched beside the wall. The figure was already gone. She had moved before the boot left the ground. Not fast, not athletic, just precise. Her body had shifted exactly far enough to let the soul pass through empty air, and then she was still again, hands on her knees, face turned toward a sound the drunk had not made yet. He swore and tried again. She moved again. Same precision, same economy. The gap between his boot and her ribs was never more than a finger's width, but it was always there. I walked into the alley. The drunk looked at me. I did not say anything. I did not need to. Whatever he saw in my face sent him stumbling the other way, bottle swinging, and he was gone before I took another step. The figure was a girl, thin, bandaged eyes, black hair matted with alley dust. She sat with her hands on her knees the way a child sits when she is waiting to be sent somewhere else. I crouched in front of her. I told her my name. She waited 3 full seconds before answering. Her voice was soft and careful, and she placed each word like someone setting a glass on a table. Thank you. My name is Sierra. I asked her how she had dodged the kick without seeing it. She told me she heard the shift in his weight before the leg moved. She perceived the world through reflected sound, echolocation, green wireframes floating in a dark field, every surface, every object, every living thing outlined by the noise it reflected. In a quiet room, she could read the grain of the wood. In a crowded street, the wireframes collapsed into a bright screaming wall, and she could not read anything at all. I stood up and offered her my hand. I told her I had a quiet place. Mina saw us coming and nudged Lulu. Lulu stopped humming. Beatrice straightened in the driver's side shadow, but said nothing. I opened the cabin door and let Sierra step in first. The door closed behind her, and the city disappeared. Mina's cotton lined the walls, thick, dense, fibrous. Lulu's double bubble film coated the interior surfaces with a vacuum layer that swallowed vibration before it could reach the air inside. The Stirling engine beneath the floor ran at a frequency so low it barely registered as sound. Together, the 3 layers turned the cabin into a pocket of near silence. Sierra stopped in the middle of the cabin. Her hands dropped from her sides. I can hear my own heartbeat. Her voice broke on the last word, not crying, just the sound of someone encountering a thing they had stopped believing in. I have never heard it this clearly. She sat down on the navigator's bench. Her fingers found the edge of the dashboard and rested there. She tilted her head. This sound, a pause, the engine. It sounds like a heartbeat too. Mina looked at me with the expression expression of a 10-year-old who has just decided something. Lulu pressed her face to the seat back and studied Sierra's bandaged eyes with the frank curiosity of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned that staring is rude. I told Sierra that I needed a navigator. The sand corridor was a zero-visibility sandstorm. No sensor worked inside it. No guild party had crossed it in 3 years. I needed someone who could see in zero visibility. She turned her face toward me. The wireframes, she said, were clearest when there was nothing else to look at. Zero visibility was the only condition under which her perception operated without interference. The fewer competing sounds, the sharper the image. I told her the job was hers if she wanted it. She nodded before I finished the sentence. Beatrice leaned down from outside the cabin. "Master, shall I prepare the navigator's headset?" I told her yes. Then I realized I had not asked Sierra if she could read a map. Then I realized she did not need to. She was the map. I had my 4th crew member. The wall of sand hit the gigafrost at the corridor entrance and swallowed the windshield inside 40 seconds. I could not see the hood of the truck. I could not see the road. The instruments were blind. The crystal compass had jammed within the first minute, exactly as the guild report had promised. Sierra sat in the navigator's seat with her hands flat on the dashboard and her head tilted at a 5-degree angle that never changed. The headphones Beatrice had fitted were noise-canceling on the outside and amplification tuned on the inside, feeding her the truck's own hull vibrations, and the sand's reflected echoes in a clean loop. Sensitivity good. Her voice was flat and measured, the cadence of someone reading a machine output. Noise removal complete. Proceeding. Right, 30 degrees. Large rock formation at distance 200. Adjust. I turned the wheel. The rock passed on the left. I felt the sand displacement against the front axle, but never saw it. Clear. Left, 10 degrees. Small ravine. Depth unknown. Width 12. Maintain current speed and it passes beneath the right tires. I held the line. The ravine's edge scraped the undercarriage and was gone. Behind the cabin, Beatrice sat in her throne seat with both palms flat against the frame and her eyes closed. She was running a parallel cast, weight reduction across the entire truck chassis with her left hand while her right held the greatsword across her lap, ready to cancel mass and strike. A sand serpent had lunged at us 3 minutes in. She had cut it from the air without opening her eyes. The truck had not slowed. The monsters were running, not toward us, past us, fleeing westward in a stampede of segmented tails and armored hides. Sierra noted them in the same flat voice. Living signatures, 8, 12, 20, all heading west, not fleeing the storm. Vast unnatural heat signature, she said. Source beyond the border. I cannot resolve its shape. I filed it. Whatever the monsters were running from was not my delivery. Not today. Cliff. Sierra's voice tightened for the first time. 150 meters. Vertical drop, then a ledge 16 meters across, then open ground. The gap is jumpable at current speed. What happens if I slow down? We reverse back through the storm with no visibility and no compass. A pause. Accelerate. I pressed the throttle to the floor. The gigafrost surged. Mina screamed and grabbed Lulu. Lulu screamed back, and the scream turned into a laugh halfway through. Roller coaster! Lulu's voice rang through the cabin. We left the ground. 2 seconds of sand-blind air. Beatrice did not break her parallel cast. The frame stayed weightless. The tires hit the far ledge with a bang that rattled every bolt in the chassis and sent a vibration up through the steering column that I felt in my teeth. The sand thinned more, broke apart. Blue sky, hard, clean, empty blue with a sun that meant business. The border fortress was visible on the horizon, a squat stone shape baking in the heat. The thermometer read 48 degrees outside, minus 20 in the cargo bay. Sierra slumped against the cabin wall. Her breathing was ragged. The sustained echolocation through the full crossing had cost her everything she had. I put a cold water bottle in her hand. I told her she was crew now. She did not answer. Her fingers closed around the bottle. She had not let go of it by the time the fortress's outer marker appeared in the windshield. Sierra lifted her head from the wall. 4 heartbeats. Her voice was thin. South. Slow. Irregular. They cannot move anymore. I already knew whose. I turned the wheel south, 20 kilometers per hour. There was no reason to hurry. Sierra had said they could not run. The heat haze parted at 300 meters, and 4 silhouettes became 4 bodies in the sand. The scene read like a maintenance manual, written in human failure. Gray was on his knees. His greatsword lay in 3 pieces beside him. The blade had shattered mid-swing during what must have been his explosive sword technique, metal fatigue, the failure mode I had been preventing every night for 3 years. Without me, 2 months of desert heat had finished the blade. Borg had stripped to his underwear. His full-plate armor lay scattered in the sand around him like the shed skin of something that had outgrown its shell. The interior surface temperature of untreated steel plate in 48-degree air reaches the 70s within hours. He had been wearing a furnace. Lila was on her hands and knees beside a water barrel full of green-brown sludge, algae bloom. Water stored without temperature regulation in desert heat becomes a biology experiment inside 3 days. She was staring into the barrel like it owed her something. Zed was holding a potion vial at arm's length, tilting it back and forth. The liquid inside had separated into layers of murky brown sediment. Potions are chemical solutions. Heat degrades them the way heat degrades anything. Slowly, then all at once. He had a case of expensive sludge. They were blaming me. I could hear it through the closed cabin windows. Gray's voice, raw and cracked, repeating my name like it was a curse. He told the others I had left them with inferior equipment. He told them I had sabotaged the sword. He told them everything a man tells himself when the alternative is admitting that the person he fired for being too plain was the only reason any of his equipment worked. I stopped the truck 20 meters from them. I opened the cabin door. The air-conditioned chill rolled out around my boots and across the sand in a visible wave. I stepped down. I was holding a glass bottle of cold soda with condensation running down its sides. I drank it in one long pull, the entire bottle, unhurried, and tossed the empty into the trash bin Lulu kept by the running board. Gray saw me, his mouth opened. He said my name once, ragged, barely a word. Kent. I looked at him the way I would look at a cracked axle, noted, measured, filed. Lila crawled toward me. She was begging for water. Her voice was a dry whisper, and her hands left drag marks in the sand. I told them flatly that I was not a philanthropist. I was a transporter. I charged for transport, cash on delivery. The rate for emergency human transport in this heat was more than their degraded gear was worth. Gray prostrated himself in the sand. His forehead hit the ground and stayed there. Beatrice stepped down from the throne seat. She walked to Gray. She cast weight reduction on him with one hand, lifted him by the scruff of his ruined shirt with the other, and carried him to the cargo hold as if he were an empty box she was putting back on a shelf. He did not resist. He weighed less than a pillow in her grip. Lila was next, then Zed, then Borg. 4 bodies into the hold, one by one, placed on the cold cargo bay floor among the remaining ice blocks. Mina leaned out of the cabin window. Uncle Kent, the ice cream is melting. Lulu's head appeared beside her. Can we eat it before it turns into soup? They had not looked at Gray once. They did not know who he was. They were watching the ice cream. The cargo door closed with a bang. I got back in the cab. The Gigafrost rolled toward the border fortress with 4 frozen S-rank adventurers in the hold, filed under spoiled goods. The fortress gate was open. No one had the energy to close it. The commander met us in the courtyard, a broad man in sweat-darkened armor with the sunken eyes of someone who had stopped sleeping. He stared at the Gigafrost the way a drowning man stares at a rope, uncertain whether it is real. He asked how one truck could save his garrison. I opened the refrigerated cargo door. 4 frost-covered bodies tumbled onto the gravel. Gray, Lila, Borg, Zed, shivering, ice-crystalled, blinking in the sunlight like fish pulled from a freezer. The commander stared at them, and then at me, and could not reconcile the 2 images. I handed him a manifest and told him to sign for the live cargo. He signed without reading. Desperate men sign anything. Mina jumped down from the cabin. Opening time. She peeled back the cotton insulation on the first pallet. Lulu touched each vacuum seal, and the iridescent film dissolved with a snap of her fingers. Ice blocks, water barrels, cured meat in cold wrap. The supplies rolled out of the cargo bay in a white mist. Beatrice lifted the ice blocks 2 at a time. Each block weighed several hundred kilograms. In her hands, they weighed nothing. She set them in the courtyard center, and the soldiers gathered around her. And one of them, a young man with cracked lips and heat-reddened skin, whispered that she looked like a knight. I was one, Beatrice said. She set the next block down without looking at him. Now, I deliver things. I pressed my palm to the nearest ice block and pushed. Temperature manipulation at the lowest setting I needed, converting the stored cold into a wide directional current that spread across the courtyard like a river breaking its banks. Cold air, clean, dry, 20 degrees below the ambient. It rolled over the soldiers in a wave. The garrison tilted their faces into it. Several of them wept. No sound, no drama, just tears running down sunburned cheeks and men standing still with their eyes closed, feeling a temperature they had forgotten existed. Sierra leaned out of the cabin window. She had not moved from the navigator's seat since the sand crossing, but her head was tilted at that listening angle I was beginning to recognize. "I can hear everyone's heartbeats," she said. "They have changed from despair to relief." Gray was thawing on the gravel. Frost fell from his clothes in sheets. Lila looked like a mud sculpture someone had left in a freezer and then set in the sun, smeared, cracked, barely recognizable. Borg sat in the dirt in his underwear with chafed red skin and eyes that could not focus. Zed had not moved. Gray struggled to his feet. He straightened his back. He tried. He announced himself. S-rank adventurer, Crimson Fang. He demanded water and respect. His voice cracked on the word respect and came out as something closer to a cough. The soldiers turned on him before I had to say anything. One of them, the same young man who had called Beatrice a knight, walked up to Gray and told him, clearly enough for the courtyard to hear, that adventurers who could not maintain their own equipment had no right to call themselves heroes. He told him to go sit in a corner. Others joined. The mockery was brief, accurate, delivered by men who had spent 2 months at this fortress with no supplies, watching the S-rank party stationed to protect them fall apart in real time. The soldiers had decided what Gray was long before the truck arrived. They had just been too dehydrated to say it. Gray collapsed, not from the heat this time. His knees simply gave out under the weight of something heavier than armor. The commander returned to me with the signed manifest. He called me a savior and a hero of the fortress. I told him the work was done, and if he wanted to thank someone, he should thank my employees. Then I handed him the bill. 2 extra line items sat at the bottom. Human life rescue fee, biological transport fee, 1 for each body pulled from the desert. 4 bodies, 4 charges. The commander read the numbers. His face lost what color the sun had left it. He asked who paid the biological transport fee for the live cargo. I told him the cargo paid it, through the Adventurers Guild. The same guild Crimson Fang owed back dues to. Standard guild debt mechanics. Outstanding fees deducted from the party's next contract earnings, or seized as equipment in lieu. I was not inventing new systems. I was using the ones that already existed. Gray, on the gravel, heard every word. He learned he was in financial ruin from a contract he had been too frozen to read before the commander signed it on his behalf. I did not look at him again. There was nothing left to look at. I climbed back into the cab. Mina handed Sierra another water bottle. Beatrice closed the cargo door, empty now, all the ice distributed. The 4 frozen adventurers, the only delivered goods, still sitting on the courtyard stones. Lulu asked if there was still ice cream left. There was. I told her she could have 2 scoops. The Gigafrost pulled out of the fortress courtyard with the sun behind it. The air-conditioned cabin settled back to its usual temperature within 90 seconds. Sierra still had the first water bottle in one hand and the second in the other. She had not let go of either. The road ahead was flat and bright and empty. Behind us, a fortress full of soldiers who would remember the silver truck. Behind us, 4 S-rank adventurers in the dust who would remember the bill. I did not say anything. The engine hummed. Sierra tilted her head toward it. The silence that came after was the quietest sound I had heard in a long time. The commander's office smelled like hot stone and bad decisions. I laid the invoice on his desk and watched his eyes travel down the column. Emergency transport, danger surcharge, S-rank biological transport premium, mental distress compensation, false report damages. Each line item was priced exactly the way the guild's own fee schedule dictated. Not a coin higher, not a coin lower. He read the total once, set the paper down, and approved the payment without reading it again. The amount would strip Crimson Fang of their rank, freeze every piece of equipment they owned, and seize whatever savings the guild still held on their behalf. Standard collection mechanics. The 4 of them would be reassigned to manual labor in the fortress backyard until the debt cleared, which, at the rate coarse hemp and shovel work paid, meant the rest of their natural lives. I folded the receipt into my coat pocket and stood. The commander wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and mentioned the heat wave, 48 degrees and climbing, possibly caused by the Empire's strongest mage running some kind of experiment beyond the border. I filed that. Something was out there, the same source Sierra had detected in the sandstorm. I crossed the backyard on my way to the truck. Gray was there in coarse hemp, hauling rubble under the sun with the other 3. His hands were blistered. His S-rank insignia was gone. He saw me and broke rank, dropped the mop, sprinted across the yard, fell to his knees in the dirt in front of me. He begged. something about needing me, something about not being able to do anything without my maintenance, something about starting over, about how he was wrong, about how without me, the swords cracked and the potions separated and everything fell apart. I did not slow down. I walked past him the way you walk past a cart that is not yours. I told Beatrice it was loading time. Behind me, I heard his knees hit the ground a second time, heavier than the first, and then nothing. I did not look back. There was nothing behind me that I had ordered. By the truck, I pulled out the formal Kent transport employment contract and held it in front of Sierra. She told me she was blind and unsure she belonged. I told her the sand corridor happened because she was on board. She signed while tears ran down her face. Mina hugged her before the ink dried. Lulu offered half her ice cream. Beatrice told her formally that she was now the firm's defensive backbone. The temperature climbed 3 more degrees while we stood there. A young man with red hair walked through the fortress gate. The gravel under his boots melted and sizzled. Soldiers parted without being told. The air around him shimmered and bent like a lens held over a candle, and I could feel the ambient temperature rise 3 degrees just from his presence in the courtyard. He approached me with a pleasant smile and asked if I was the man who could make things cold. I offered him a glass of ice water. His finger touched the rim, and the water vaporized in a steam explosion that shattered the cup and left my palm wet with nothing. He apologized cheerfully. He could not turn his heat off. His magical output was too high for his own circuits, and every delicate spell burned out before it formed. Materials, he said, were fragile. He carried a thick notebook under one arm and looked at the Gigafrost the way a child looks at a toy he is not allowed to open. His name was Finn. He had killed a 100-meter fire dragon in the mountains beyond the border and needed the corpse delivered to the capital intact. If he carried it himself, he would burn it to ash. Sierra read his heartbeat and reported it steady. No malice, just phenomenon, like a typhoon wearing boots. My stressed stomach activated. I reached for the antacid in my coat and chewed one while I did the math. The upside was my cooling technology proving itself at empire scale. The downside was dying, but Finn was standing right there radiating enough heat to cook an egg on the ground between us. So the downside applied whether I took the job or not. I accepted. Finn led us to a crater where a mountain peak used to be. At the bottom lay 100 meters of dead fire dragon, curled in on itself like a fist that had stopped mid-swing. Its blood still boiled like magma in the gaps between scales. Steam erupted in geysers from every joint. The heat hit us from 50 meters away. I deployed an air curtain to shield the team and burned through mana faster than I liked. Sierra tilted her head and said the heat was a roar with no malice. Just phenomenon, like thunder or an earthquake. Not alive, not angry, just energy with nowhere to go. I approached one of the claws, pressed my hand to the scale, and stopped molecular motion in a 1-meter radius. Frost bloomed across the surface in a clean white circle. The temperature inside that circle dropped to absolute 0 while the thermal energy bled into the ground through conduction. Energy conservation, not creation, not suppression. You take the heat away and fix it somewhere else. Finn pressed against my shoulder, eyes wide, asking to be frozen too. I shoved him off. Stepping away from a man whose boots melt gravel takes more steps than a shove, and my patience was already shorter than my mana reserve. I called positions. Beatrice readied weight reduction. Mina readied the fluffy coating. Lulu readied the vacuum seal. I worked my way around the full length of the dragon, section by section, bleeding heat downward into the earth until the ground beneath the crater was warm and the dragon was not. 15 minutes. The boiling stopped. The glow died. 100 meters of legendary fire dragon sat at absolute 0 in a mountain crater that smelled like ozone and regret. Mina coated the frozen dragon in a thick pink cushioning shell that stretched and wrapped until the corpse looked like something you would win at a festival. Lulu sealed the cocoon in a giant rainbow vacuum bubble. Surface tension reinforced, air removed, insulation locked. The result was an enormous pink and rainbow plushy caterpillar longer than a city block. Beatrice leaped onto the cocoon and activated weight reduction at maximum output. Thousands of tons became a tow load. I linked the cocoon to the hitch and allowed myself 1 second of professional satisfaction. Then, Finn pointed at a granite outcrop blocking the exit road and casually vaporized the entire formation with 1 finger. The shockwave cracked my windshield and rolled the cocoon 10 meters sideways. Everyone hit the dirt. I grabbed him by the robe and yelled. He looked at me with genuine confusion. The road was clearer now. What was the problem? Sierra reported from behind a rock that his heartbeat was perfectly perfectly steady, zero malice. He had just helpfully erased a mountain. I strapped him into the passenger seat, told him to keep his hands in his lap, and informed him that he was not to use magic again until we reached the capital. He pouted like a child told to sit still during a long carriage ride. I started the engine and pulled my last antacid from my coat. The Gigafrost rolled out of the crater, dragging the world's largest plushie behind it, and my stomach told me everything it thought about the next 3 days. Inside the cabin, Finn watched the crew from the passenger seat and took notes in his book. Beatrice held her weight reduction cast from her seat, sweating from Finn's ambient heat, even with the air conditioning at full. Sierra sat with her headphones on, tracking the road by sound. Finn asked Sierra why she was not afraid of him. She answered in her quiet, careful voice that he made no emotional sound, not a person, just a force. He wrote that down with a small nod. He turned to me and asked why weak humans bothered to keep trying when they lacked the power to guarantee anything. I kept my eyes on the road and told him that weakness forces ingenuity, and ingenuity is the reason we were still standing. He wrote that down too. Then he closed the notebook and said, almost to himself, that our wisdom might be more beautiful than his magic. Then Sierra's head snapped left. Wyverns, dozens of them, closing from the east, drawn by the carrion magic smell leaking through the cocoon. Beatrice reported through gritted teeth that she could not break her weight reduction cast without snapping the truck axle. Sierra fed me coordinates by sound, her voice steady, clinical, precise. Right flank, 30 degrees up, 200 meters, closing in 3 seconds. I cast icing onto the first wave's wings, freezing the moisture trapped in their membranes until the aerodynamic profile collapsed and the lift died. 3 dropped out of the sky alive, crashing into the wasteland dirt and limping away with frost still crackling on their feathers. They were not dead. They were grounded and terrified, and that was the point. The next wave came. I froze them the same way, and the next. Sierra called each formation before it reached us, and I iced each one before it could dive. After half the swarm was grounded and howling, the rest learned. They banked hard, caught a thermal, and fled south. Finn watched in silence through the whole engagement. When the last wyvern vanished, he opened his notebook and wrote one line. He said my combat method was division. I separated the threat from its ability to threaten. His own method was subtraction. He erased the threat entirely. He told me he saw the point of mine. I said nothing. Corpses attract scavengers. Live frightened wyverns spread the word that this truck is not worth chasing. That was all the philosophy I had budget for today. The Capitol walls rose on the horizon, golden in the late sun. I had almost stopped sweating. My stomach had settled to a manageable hum. 2 more hours and the cargo would be off my hitch and I could sleep for the first time in 3 days. Then the cabin alarm shrieked. The air conditioning died. The temperature inside jumped 5 degrees in 2 seconds and kept climbing. I checked the rearview mirror. The cocoon's pink cotton was melting, running down the sides in hot pink streams. Red heat bled through the rainbow membrane like a wound reopening from the inside. Finn said it the way you might mention a wrong turn. Calculation error. The dragon's heart had reactivated. Prolonged cooling triggered a survival instinct in the organ, and now the thermal runaway was building toward detonation. He had forgotten to mention that part. He offered cheerfully to teleport the team to safety and abandon the cargo. I told him no. I was a delivery man. There was no abandoned delivery in my vocabulary. Not for heat stroke heroes, not for wyverns, and not for a dragon that had decided to reheat itself from the inside out. I told Finn to extract the dragon's heat with his magic and feed every degree of it directly into the truck's Stirling engine. The engine was built to convert thermal differentials into kinetic energy. I would regulate the intake walls with my own magic to keep them from melting. He just needed to supply the heat. His eyes lit up. He had not been allowed to use magic in 3 days, and the restriction had been killing him. He extracted. The engine accepted the thermal feed. My hand stayed on the intake regulation, holding the temperature inside the cylinders at operational range, while dragon-grade heat poured in from outside. The RPMs crossed the red line. The needle on the speedometer stopped meaning anything. 100, 200, 300. A clean clap of displaced air, and we broke the sound barrier. Beatrice screamed. Sierra gripped the handrail and smiled faintly. She said the engine was singing like a dragon's roar. Mina and Lulu cheered from the back seat. I shifted into top gear. The Gigafrost barreled toward the Capitol gate at supersonic speed, dragging a melting pink plushy dragon behind it. Guards on the wall saw us coming and scattered. I leaned on the horn. Express delivery passing through. The capital's main avenue stretched ahead of us like a canyon with no ceiling. Banners along the rooftops caught the wind from our shockwave and tore loose. Citizens turned, pointed, ran. Guards at intersections flattened themselves against walls and let us pass because there was no version of their training that covered a refrigerated truck doing the speed of sound through a market district. The emperor's statue rose at the end of the avenue, bronze, twice the height of the truck, one arm extended toward the horizon. That was the delivery point. I poured every remaining jewel of magic into the brakes. The Stirling engine reversed its cycle. The thermal differential inverted and the wheels locked onto a layer of ground ice. I laid down in real time to absorb the deceleration shock. Without it, the plaza stone would have cracked from the Capitol Square to the palace steps. The truck drifted. The sound barrier collapsed behind us like a door slamming shut. Frost rolled off the chassis in a white cloud that swallowed the plaza for 3 full seconds. Inside the cabin, the G-force pressed me into the seat hard enough to remind my back of every bad decision it had ever made. Then the Gigafrost stopped, precisely at the base of the statue. No skid, no scratch. The frost mist parted, and the 100-meter cocoon settled behind the truck like something dreaming. Pink cotton, rainbow membrane, white frost still curling off the surface in lazy spirals. Not burned, not torn, sleeping. My stomach reminded me that it existed. I pressed one hand to it and opened the door with the other. I stepped down, rubbing my stomach. The plaza was silent for one breath, and then it was not. Every citizen within 3 blocks seemed to arrive at the same moment, pressing against the guard lines, standing on crates and cart roofs, leaning out of second-story windows. Sierra leaned out of the cab and reported what she heard. Thousands of heartbeats, fear converting to excitement in real time. The plaza was the loudest thing she had encountered since the sandstorm. Mina climbed onto the running board and waved. Lulu waved from behind Mina's shoulder, too short to clear the window frame on her own. Beatrice stepped down and stood at my left with her spine straight and her silver ponytail catching the afternoon light. Formal night bearing, not a hair out of place, as if she had not spent the last 3 days holding a weight reduction cast while a dragon tried to detonate itself on the highway. Finn emerged from the passenger side last. He stretched. The air around his body bent and shimmered, and the nearest puddle of frost mist vaporized on contact. Imperial high officials sprinted across the plaza the moment they recognized him, robes flapping, seals bouncing on gold chains. They surrounded him. They praised him. One of them declared loudly enough for the crowd to hear that this was the proof of the Empire's fire supremacy. The Imperial head mage had subdued the legendary fire dragon with overwhelming magic. I said nothing. I leaned against the truck's fender and watched the officials congratulate the wrong man. Finn let them finish. He waited the polite 3 seconds after the last official stopped talking. Then he raised one hand. He pointed at the cocoon behind the truck. He asked the officials, brightly, to look at the dragon. Actually look. He asked if it was burned. The officials looked. It was not burned. He asked if it was singed. The officials looked more carefully. It was not singed, not scorched, not even discolored. 100 meters of legendary fire dragon, encased in frost, pink cotton, and a rainbow membrane, and not a single scale had been touched by flame. Finn turned back to the officials, and his voice carried across the square without effort. The voice of a man who had vaporized mountains and never needed to raise it. If my firepower had subdued this dragon, he said, there would be nothing left but ashes. He let the sentence sit in the afternoon air. The crowd went quiet enough for me to hear my own pulse. I killed it. I could not carry it. The fire that destroys cannot preserve. That is the limitation of pure power, and I am standing in front of it. He turned. He pointed at me, at the truck, at Mina, still waving on the running board, and Lulu peeking out from behind her, at Beatrice standing at my left with her silver hair catching the sun, at Sierra leaning from the cab window with her cloth over her eyes and her head tilted toward the noise. The dragon was subdued by an iron box, Finn said, by cotton candy, by soap bubbles, by a weightless sword, and by a blind girl who hears the road. Magic you would have mocked. Every single one of them. He paused. His logistics is more magical than magic. The officials stared. The crowd stared. I did not move. My hand was still on my stomach, and my back hurt, and the afternoon sun was making me squint, and the most powerful mage in the Empire was pointing at my cheap work clothes and calling my refrigerated truck a miracle in front of every important person in the capital. Somewhere behind that moment was a guild hall months ago. Gray laughing, the party laughing, the word plane hanging in the air like a verdict that had already been decided. I did not think about that on purpose. It arrived on its own, and I let it pass through without holding it. Finn bowed. Not a nod, not a tilt. A full formal imperial court bow. Back straight, head low, held for a count of 3. In front of the officials, in front of the crowd, in front of the bronze emperor whose arm pointed at the horizon, and the 100-meter sleeping dragon whose frost was still curling in the afternoon light. A private acknowledgement would have changed nothing. This man understood that. He was the imperial head mage, and he chose the version the empire would remember. The silence lasted one more second. Then the applause started at the back of the crowd and rolled forward like a wave, picking up volume as it came, until it hit the guard line and became a roar. The officials pivoted, not because they understood what had happened, but because the dragon was in the plaza, intact, signed for, and argument was no longer available. They applauded the technology. They cheered the team. One of them shouted that the cooling system was the true triumph of the delivery. Mina waved harder. Lulu bounced on the running board. Beatrice stood perfectly still at my left and let the noise wash over her without expression, but her hand at her side trembled once. Sierra's voice came softly from the cabin. She said the crowd's heartbeat had shifted. 1,000 people had gone from confused to proud in the space of Finn's bow. She said it was the cleanest sound she had heard since the sandstorm broke. Finn waved an attendant forward. The attendant carried a heavy crate and a rolled parchment tied with a gold ribbon. Finn opened the crate. Gold coins, more than the truck could hold, stacked in rows that caught the light. Beside the crate lay a second chest with the dragon scales and bones I had frozen 3 days ago, the heat-resistant materials that could withstand thousands of degrees. And the parchment was an imperial commendation, signed by 3 court officials and stamped with the seal of the empire. He handed the parchment to me. His fingers were warm enough to leave a scorch mark on the edge of the paper. He told me, grinning, to call him if anything fun came up. He winked at Sierra through the cab window. Then the air around him bent once, and he shimmered out in a haze of displaced heat, leaving nothing behind but a scorch mark on the plaza stone where his boots had been. The officials clustered around me with contract offers and partnership proposals. I told them to send everything to Frozen Station and to talk to my base manager about scheduling. Then I loaded the gold, the materials, and the commendation into the cargo hold, climbed back into the cab, and put the Gigafrost in gear. The truck rolled south through the Capitol gate with the cocoon still trailing behind us. The crowd followed us to the edge of the city walls and then thinned. The late sun threw our shadow 100 meters ahead of us on the road. Sierra spoke from the navigator's seat. Her voice was careful and level, but there was something underneath it that had not been there before. She said she heard something from far to the south, underneath the road noise and the wind, and the distant wave of the crowd behind us. Underneath all of that, a sound, water, waves, and beneath the waves, a cry. Something alive, something sad, something asking for help in a voice she could not identify. I filed it. The south was where we were going anyway. Whatever was down there, it would keep until after I paid the crew. 3 days later, the Gigafrost pulled into Frozen Station, and I almost drove past. The building I had left behind was a quiet desert outpost with a garage and a cooling unit. The building in front of me was a business. Unfamiliar carriages filled the garage lot. Travelers sat eating lunch under a cooled awning that had not existed when I left. A hand-painted sign above the entrance read, Frozen Station, cold water, cold storage, cold peace of mind. Merchants in road-dusty coats stood at a counter that had definitely not been there a month ago, drinking something with ice in it and looking deeply satisfied with their life choices. Sierra reported from the cabin. More than 10 heartbeats inside. None hostile, none tense. All relaxed and warm in the way that meant spending money comfortably. Beatrice looked at the carriages and said, in her driest tone, that those were customers. Mina pressed her face against the window and cheered. Lulu pressed her face against the window below Mina's and asked if there were souvenirs. Inside, the lobby was cool. Merchants sat on benches sipping cold water. The place smelled like chilled metal and commercial ambition. Behind the counter stood a woman I had seen exactly once before. Mid-20s, suntanned, blonde hair tied up in a knot that meant she did not have time to deal with it properly. She wore a leather apron over a linen shirt, and she was doing math in a ledger with one hand while pouring cold water for a customer with the other. Welcome back, boss. Sarah looked up without stopping her pour. 3 days early, she finished the transaction, 1 copper coin for the cold water, and slid a thick account book across the counter toward me. Next to it, she dropped a leather money bag heavy enough to thud on the wood. This month's profits, she said, expenses, and her 30% share already deducted. I opened the book. The numbers were clean, organized, and profitable. She had used my vacuum-sealed magic containers to sell ice by the block to passing merchants and rented out the cold storage room by the silver coin per day. In the desert, she explained without being asked, you put up a sign that says air conditioning and customers find you even if you try to hide. I introduced Sierra. Sarah looked at her for 2 seconds, saw the cloth over her eyes, and said nothing about it. She reached under the counter, produced a wrapped candy, and placed it in Sierra's palm. Sierra's fingers closed around it. She tilted her head and listened. Mina grabbed Sarah around the waist. Lulu asked if there were snacks. Sarah told Sierra it was nice to meet her. Sierra whispered to me, low enough that only I could hear, that Sarah's heartbeat was fast, a calculating rhythm, like someone who was always doing arithmetic. But there was no lie in it. Sarah valued this place the way she valued her own profit. The two were the same thing. 2 months ago, I had hired Sarah off a job posting. She walked into the empty base, looked at the sand and the cooling unit and the nothing else, and asked me what the revenue share was. I told her 30% of everything, full management authority, and she could sell cold water to the sun itself if she wanted to. Beatrice had stood behind me and muttered something about leaving the castle to a vixen. Sarah had said the word vixen was flattering, and she accepted the terms. I drove away the next morning and did not check in once. Here were the results. I paid the team from the gold. Mina counted hers twice and cheered. Lulu put hers in her pocket and asked for dinner. Beatrice folded her payment into her coat and said nothing, but her posture loosened by 1 degree. Sierra held her coins in both palms and stood still for a long moment, and then she thanked me in a voice so small it almost did not clear the room. The next morning, the upgrade began. I pulled the dragon scales from the cargo hold and spread them across the workshop floor. Each one was the size of a dinner plate, deep red, and when I tapped it with a wrench, the sound rang like a bell that had been forged inside a volcano. Thousands of degrees of heat resistance, the best insulation the natural world had ever produced, and I was going to bolt it to a truck. The engine room bulkhead went first. I used my temperature magic to fuse the dragon scale directly into the steel chassis, welding at the molecular level without rivets or adhesive. The scale bonded and held, red locking into silver in a seam that would outlast the truck. Beatrice lifted each plate into position, weightless, and then released the spell. At the moment I fused, letting the mass return as the bond set. Mina handed me tools and cheered at the color. She said the red sparkly stuff was the best thing she had seen since ice cream. Lulu held the drill to a scale and reported, solemnly, that the drill was screaming. We worked through the morning. Dragon scale engine room, dragon scale inner frame, dragon bone powder mixed into the paint for corrosion resistance. By afternoon, the truck sat in the bay, with red lines running across silver chassis like war paint drawn by someone who had studied thermodynamics instead of art. The Giga Frost Dragoon Custom, triple the heat resistance of the original. Durability beyond anything I could measure with the tools I had. The most dangerous delivery vehicle on the continent, built in a desert garage by a man with a bad back, an exiled knight, 2 children, and the leftover bones of a dead god. Sarah handed me a cold canned coffee and leaned against the counter. She asked where we were heading next. South, I told her. I wanted to see the sea. Beatrice, behind me, said something quiet. She said she looked forward to hearing the sea's sound turn into a joyful one. The sentence was soft and careful and carried the weight of something I did not yet understand. I filed it. Beatrice's past had edges I had not been shown, and I was not the kind of boss who pried. Sarah's face changed. The easy business confidence dropped away and something harder took its place. She warned me. The southern sea had been blocked for a month. Something underneath the water, nobody could name it, was making the entire passage impassable. Ships sank. Merchants abandoned their routes. The southern islands had been cut off completely. Medicine running out, salt supply collapsed. People dying because the logistics chain had broken, and nobody was brave enough to fix it. She reached under the counter and produced a letter with a wax seal. Her business contact on the coast needed a special medicine delivered to an isolated southern island. Normal merchants had given up. She held the letter across the counter and looked at me. Can you deliver an impossible mission? I read the letter. I looked at the team. Beatrice stood behind me with her hand resting on the truck's fender. Sierra sat in the cab with her head tilted toward the south, listening to something the the rest of us could not hear. Mina and Lulu were still inside arguing about who got the last candy. I signed the acceptance on Sarah's counter. One line: there are no delivery zones for Kent transport. If there are no ships, we drive. If there is no road, we make one with ice. I kissed Mina on the top of her head and then Lulu on hers. I told Sarah to keep the base and to expand the warehouse if the margins held. She told me she had already started. The Gigafrost Dragoon Custom rolled out of Frozen Station before noon. The red dragon scale lines caught the sun and threw hot light across the sand in streaks. The engine hummed differently now, deeper, more confident, like it knew what it was wearing. Mina sat in the back seat kicking her legs. Lulu had already fallen asleep against Mina's shoulder, with candy wrappers still stuck to her cheek. Beatrice rode shotgun with her arms crossed, watching the South Road unroll through the windshield. She had not said anything since the sea comment, but her posture carried something: anticipation or memory or both. Sierra sat in the navigator's seat with her hands folded in her lap. She spoke once, quietly, as the base disappeared behind us. She said she could hear the sea now, far ahead, waves rolling, and underneath the waves, still there, still calling, a sound that she could not explain to anyone who heard the world the way the rest of us did. Something alive, something in pain, something that had been asking for help for a very long time and had almost given up expecting anyone to come. The South Road stretched ahead of us, empty and straight and burning. The Gigafrost Dragoon Custom ate the distance without complaint. I kept my hands on the wheel and my eyes forward and let the hum of the engine carry us toward whatever was waiting at the edge of the water. Behind us, Frozen Station shrank to a shimmer and then to nothing. Ahead, the horizon trembled with heat. Somewhere past it, the sea was crying. We were coming. The southern port smelled like brine and overripe fruit. We had crossed the desert in under a day, and the Dragoon Custom sat on the pier, engine ticking as it cooled. The emerald water stretched out flat to the horizon. No whitecaps, no sails, just empty blue pressing against white sand. Mina was already in the water. Lulu followed 3 steps behind with a float ring almost bigger than she was. They lasted about 4 seconds before Lulu spat a mouthful back into the sea. "Uncle Kent, this water got salt and sugar mixed up." Mina wiped her face. "It tastes like the ocean is trying to pickle us." I let them splash. Beatrice swam out with clean strokes, came back dripping, and reported what I had already noticed. Not a single ship on the horizon, not even a fishing boat. A fisherman on the pier confirmed it. The sea had been impassable for a month, storms out of nowhere, boats that went out and did not come back. The town was living off stored grain. I walked to the waterline and tried what I came here to do. I pressed my palm toward the surface and pushed everything I had into freezing a patch of seawater. The ice formed, a thin white disc the size of a manhole cover. It held for about 2 seconds. Then the crystal lattice cracked, sagged, and dissolved back into the waves like sugar in hot tea. I tried again, pushed harder, same result. The ocean swallowed my cold the way a furnace swallows a snowflake. Freezing point depression. Salinity around 3.5% meant the water would not solidify until roughly minus 21 degrees, and the ocean's heat capacity was functionally infinite. Warm currents replaced every cold patch faster than I could pull the heat out. I would need 3 to 5 times my normal output just to start, and the sea would undo it before I could build on it. I needed pure water, and I had no way to make it at scale. Sierra tilted her head. She had her hand cupped behind one ear, the way she did when something was too faint for the rest of us. "Over there," she said softly. "From the rocky cove. Water separating. Something crystallizing." I followed her. The salt farm looked like it had been closed for years. Rusted pans, cracked stone channels, bleached wood frames. In the middle of the wreckage, a woman in a white lab coat stood ankle deep in a tidal pool. Thick goggles pushed up on silver hair that the sea breeze had turned into wire. She was muttering into a measurement device. Concentration 0.5% above predicted. Evaporation rate minus 0.2. Inefficient. She flicked her wrist. The pool split. Water on one side, a heap of white crystals on the other. Salt manipulation at the ionic level. She was stripping sodium and chlorine straight out of the seawater and leaving behind a pool of pure water. She was venting the pure water back into the sea. To her, the salt was the product, and the water was waste. The townspeople blamed her for the sea troubles, called her the witch who dirties the ocean. The real cause was whatever had been sinking ships for a month, but nobody was in the mood for accurate attribution. That is my treasure you are throwing away, I said. She looked at me like I had walked into her office without knocking. I am busy. Go away, delivery guy. I did not go away. I told her what I needed. Pure water, at volume, continuously, fast enough to freeze a road across the sea. I told her what I could offer. The Gigafrost engine waste heat, which would dry her salt crystals 10 times faster than the sun. I showed her the math. She was dismissive for about 10 seconds. Then she registered that the delivery guy standing in her salt farm understood ionic separation, thermal exchange coefficients, and waste heat recycling. Interesting. She pushed her goggles down. Let us see if you're all talk. The joint experiment took 3 minutes. Selena extracted a cubic meter of pure water from the sea. I froze it into a clear ice pillar, the height of a man. 0 impurities, no crystal distortion, strong enough to take a wave strike without cracking. She ran her hand over the surface. Beautiful, she said, and meant the crystallography. Behind me, Beatrice leaned toward Sierra. I have never seen Master look so happy while talking. Sierra nodded. Their wavelengths match. Selena agreed to join the crossing as a technical advisor in exchange for data collection rights. We shook hands. Her grip was calloused from years of working alone. I loaded Selena's instruments into the cab and called positions. Beatrice rear, Mina and Lulu by the windows. Sierra up front, Selena passenger seat. She checked the link between her salt manipulation cast and the cooling engine. Your system and mine are synced. Theoretically, we should not fall. And if we do, I said, it is a group swim. I drove the Gigafrost Dragoon Custom off the end of the pier. For one stomach-dropping second, the wheels touched open water. Then, Selena's magic stripped the salt from the patch directly under us. I flash froze the pure water in under 1/10 of a second, and the tires caught solid ice. Beatrice held the truck near weightless, so the surface would not crack. The engine's waste heat looped back into the combustion chamber. The pistons drove the wheels drew fresh seawater, and the cycle repeated. We hit 100 kilometers per hour on a road that did not exist until we made it. Behind us, the ice trail stretched to the horizon. A white line scored across emerald water, fish visible underneath like shadows in glass. Ahead, the road materialized fresh each second, the salt ripping away and the freeze slamming down in a rhythm so tight I could feel it in my teeth. Mina pressed her face to the glass. There are fish under us. I can see them. Lulu pointed. That one is bigger than my head. Beatrice murmured something about a mythical chariot running on the sea. Selena was reading her instruments, calling out efficiency numbers I actually enjoyed hearing. Waste heat return at 97%. Salt extraction consistent. The whole system running like a closed loop that would last as long as there was ocean beneath us. My stomach had stopped hurting for the first time in 2 weeks. Then Sierra stiffened. The wave sound she had been monitoring vanished. In its place, deep, heavy bubbles from far below, something massive pushing upward. The sound changed, she whispered. From the bottom, something enormous is rising. The sea ahead of the truck began to swell. I called battle stations. The ocean split open ahead of us. Water boiled upward, and a red-black mass rose out of the deep. Tentacles thicker than the truck, skin slick with centuries of barnacles and trailing kelp. A body the size of a small island blocking the entire visible horizon. The Kraken. The thing that had been choking the southern sea for a month. It did not attack the truck, it attacked the ice. One tentacle slammed down ahead of us and shattered the road into floating shards. Another swept the path behind. The creature was intelligent enough to cut our footing rather than fight us directly. Sierra pressed both hands to her ears. Underwater sound traveled over 4 times faster than air and decayed slower. The Kraken's presence was a wall of noise hammering straight into her skull. Beatrice! I swerved hard, laid fresh ice to the left. She leaned from the rear hatch and swung her zero-mass blade at a tentacle as it struck the flank. The edge passed through the soft tissue like a knife through water. The wound closed before she could deepen it. Regeneration faster than the cut. No resistance, she said through her teeth. It is like cutting a water balloon. The Kraken was cornering us. Ice shattered on 3 sides. Mina screamed. Lulu grabbed her sister and buried her face. I laid ice left, then right, then left again, drifting around tentacle strikes that left craters in the frozen surface behind us. Every combat solution I had ever used relied on temperature. Freeze it, shatter it, move on. But this creature was the sea itself, and freezing the sea was the one thing I had already failed to do today. I asked Selena for weaknesses. Mollusk structure, mostly water, soft body. Physical attacks are meaningless against regeneration at this scale. We saw it at the same time. Osmotic pressure, I said. Osmotic pressure, she said, half a breath behind. If her magic flooded the Kraken's body with hypersaline brine, salt concentration orders of magnitude above anything biological, the creature's cells would lose their water through osmosis. Dehydration at the cellular level. No regeneration can outrun that. I gave Selena 30 seconds. She climbed through the roof hatch into the wind, silver hair whipping across her goggles, and gathered her cast. Salt poured out of the surrounding seawater, not a trickle, a flood, and concentrated into a cubic meter of brine so dense it was practically syrup. Over 30% salinity, a concentration that nothing biological could survive contact with. She hurled it against the Kraken's exposed flank. The effect was immediate. The creature's tissue, saturated with low salinity water, could not resist the gradient. Osmosis pulled the moisture out of every cell it touched. The flank shriveled, collapsed inward, went from glistening red-black to dry gray in seconds. I froze the dehydrated patch to absolute zero. The tissue turned to brittle ice. The Kraken screamed, not with a voice, because it had none, but with its entire body thrashing the sea so hard that Sierra went briefly deaf. Then it sank. The dehydrated flank could not generate buoyancy, and the nervous system was in shock. Beatrice canceled the weight reduction. 300 tons of truck hit the surfacing frozen mass and crushed it into glittering shards that scattered across the waves. The sea calmed. The freshwater freezing drive resumed. Sierra removed her hands from her ears, tested the silence, and smiled for the first time since the crossing began. The sea sounds normal again, she said. The island appeared through the sea fog like a memory. Low green hills, a wooden dock, and people on the beach who were thin enough to see their ribs. They watched the silver truck roll out of the mist and onto their sand, and none of them moved. Mina was the first one off the truck, then Lulu. The girls carried crates of vegetables and dried meat into the village storehouse, while Beatrice lifted the heavier boxes with one hand. Selena carried bags of purified salt, the byproduct of every kilometer of ice road we had driven. The village elder accepted them with shaking hands. He called her the salt goddess. She told him it was waste liquid from an experiment and not to make it weird. I collected the delivery fee from the merchant guild escrow that Sarah had arranged via letter before we left. Then I turned to Selena. She was standing at the waterline, looking south. I am staying, she said. The data I collected during the crossing is the first of its kind. That creature was not alone. The ecology down here is unlike anything on record. I need years, not days. I did not argue. I had read her the moment she chose the abandoned salt farm over the town. Some people need the work more than they need the company. The sea was her research the way the truck was mine, and neither of us would walk away from ours for comfort. We shook hands again. Come back if you ever need salt at scale, she said. Do not die from thermodynamics, I told her. She almost smiled. Do not crash from heat death. The Gigafrost Dragoon Custom rolled back onto the ice road that Selena built for us from the shore. She waved once. The truck disappeared into the sea fog, and the road held all the way to the mainland. Mina asked me if Selena would be okay alone. I told her Selena was not alone. She had the sea now. Sierra reported that the waves sounded the way waves were supposed to sound. Lulu fell asleep against the window with salt in her hair. We climbed the southern desert toward Frozen Station in the afternoon light. My stomach was quiet. The south road was empty ahead of us. 2 days back from the southern island, and the girls were still unpacking. Mina had a row of seashells lined up on the counter by size. Lulu was showing Sarah a small jar of crystallized salt that Selena had given her, holding it up to the light like a gemstone. The Gigafrost Dragoon Custom sat in the courtyard with its dragon scale panels ticking in the afternoon heat. Engine off, everything quiet. Then the dust moved wrong. A carriage appeared on the south road, lacquered black. gold trim, 4 horses that looked like they cost more than most houses. It rolled into the courtyard and stopped. 4 private soldiers stepped out first, armed, faces blank. A legal official in gray robes followed, carrying a roll of black parchment sealed with wax. The man who stepped out last had eyes like a reptile pricing a mouse. Goldwyn, capital merchant. He wore silk in the desert and did not sweat. He walked straight past the soldiers, past Sarah at the entrance, past the truck he had clearly already measured with his eyes, and stopped 3 paces from me. His official unrolled the parchment. The seal was royal. The documents proved that Goldwyn had purchased the debt of the orphanage where Mina and Lulu had lived before I found them, and with the debt, the legal custody of both girls. The official confirmed it in a voice that had no opinion about anything. The paperwork was valid. My employment contract with the girls had no guardian consent. It was void. He told me to hand them over immediately. Mina's hand found my leg. She pressed her face into my hip, and her shoulders shook. "I don't want to go with the scary man," she said into the fabric. Lulu grabbed my other hand with both of hers and did not speak. She just held on. Steel whispered behind me. Beatrice had her sword half drawn, the edge catching the sun. I put my hand on her forearm. "Sheathe it." Her jaw locked. "Master, this man is using children as collateral for debt. As a knight, I cannot overlook." "If you draw that sword," I said, "we become criminals. Criminals cannot be guardians. They take the girls anyway and we go to a cell. Sheathe it." The blade slid back into the scabbard. Beatrice's hand stayed on the grip, knuckles white. Sierra leaned close to my ear. "Calculation and greed," she whispered. "This man's heartbeat sounds like gold coins." Goldwyn smiled. He did not need to hear Sierra to know he was winning. He presented his settlement offer. Release the custody back to me in exchange for the Giga Frost Dragoon Custom, the truck for the children. He called it a fair trade. He called the girls a few gold coins worth of investment. He called my truck a dream's crystallization and said it deserved a proper owner. Mina was still crying. Lulu was still holding on. The legal official's pen hovered over the transfer document, waiting. I did not pause. I did not negotiate. I did not ask for time. "Take it," I said. Beatrice exhaled like she had been holding her breath since the sword went back in. Goldwyn's smile widened until it showed teeth. He handed me the guardianship transfer document. I signed it. He signaled a subordinate to collect the magic key. Mina looked up at me with wet eyes. "But it's Uncle's treasure," she said. "You built it from nothing." Lulu hiccuped. "The truck." I knelt in the dust in front of them. I put a hand on each of their heads. I told them the only thing that was true. Objects can be remade. Family cannot. Mina's face crumpled. She threw her arms around my neck and sobbed. Lulu pressed into my side. Goldwyn's subordinate climbed into the driver's seat. The engine ground to life, barely. The truck lurched forward at walking pace, tires sinking into the courtyard sand under its own unmagicked weight. Without Beatrice's cast, the dragon-scale frame was its full mass. Tens of tons of dead metal on wheels designed for a fraction of that load. Without my cooling, the Stirling engine had no temperature gradient to run on. The truck crawled over the ridge and disappeared. Sarah watched it go from the station entrance. She turned to me. Her arms were folded. "You handed that over awfully fast," she said. "You have a plan." I did not answer right away. Inside the hour, a passing merchant courier brought the news. The stolen truck had broken down on the open desert road. Accelerator dead. Engine temperature past the red line. Black smoke. The suspension had snapped under unmagicked weight, and the axle had collapsed into the sand. Goldwyn's soldiers were starting to dehydrate. Mina heard the report mid-ice cream. She laughed so hard she choked. Lulu joined her, kicking her feet against the bench. Beatrice looked at me with something between respect and accusation. "Master," she said, "your personality is terrible." I took Finn's magic contact card out of my jacket pocket and activated it. "Hey Finn, can you hear me? I have a fun proposal. Joint development. My truck got stolen by a bad guy. We need to build a new one, better than the last one. I have the theory. You have the Empire's best materials. Interested?" The response was a single bright word, and the call cut. Less than 10 seconds later, the sky to the north tore open. A shockwave trail punching through the clouds in a straight line toward us. Consecutive teleportation magic ripping the air apart at intervals. Sierra tilted her head. "A disaster is coming," she said calmly. "On its own." I grinned. Finn arrived in his own prototype. A golden truck called Prometheus, over-decorated to the point of absurdity, packed with every fire magic stone his Imperial laboratory owned. It came in at near supersonic speed, drifted sideways across the courtyard tile, and caught fire before it fully stopped. Finn stepped out covered in soot, grinning like a kid who had just ridden the world's worst roller coaster and wanted to go again. I opened the engine hood. The block was glowing red from the inside out, several thousand degrees, no damage to the frame, because the frame was made of something that should not have been in a prototype truck, orichalcum, the strongest alloy the Empire possessed, and the heat pipes running through the block were mithril, national treasure grade silver metal with thermal conductivity that made copper look like clay. You packed an Imperial treasury into a truck, I said, and forgot to put in a cooling system. He tilted his head. Does it need one? A heat engine runs on temperature difference. You gave it more heat without giving it a cold side. It is a bomb with wheels. I ran my hand along the orichalcum frame. It was warm, but structurally perfect. Not a single fracture. My old truck's dragon scale frame could not have survived half this thermal load. But this frame can take everything I have. We stripped the decorations. Finn bent mithril and orichalcum with his bare hands like soft clay. His raw magical output was beyond anything I had seen. We built the cooling circuit in 3 hours. Then we hit the wall. The thermal load from Finn's combined fire magic stone array exceeded anything a standard radiator could dissipate. My cooling was pulling heat out of the engine, but the waste heat had nowhere to go. It was accumulating in the desert air around the workshop, raising the ambient temperature, shrinking the gradient I needed. A closed loop losing efficiency with every cycle. I sat down on an orichalcum plate. I thought for 2 minutes. Then I sat Finn down across from me. First law of thermodynamics, I said. Energy is not created or destroyed. It only moves. Your fire magic moves heat out of your body and into the world. Same principle, different direction. If you reverse the geometry of the same cast, you pull heat in instead of pushing it out. Finn stared at me. I watched the idea cross his face like sunrise. I am not just a bomb, he said slowly. I am a pump, and a pump works both ways. He stood up. He extended his hand. He shaped his magic backwards. The air around his palm froze. Not ice, something finer. Diamond dust. Microscopic crystalline flakes of water vapor that had been ripped of their heat so fast they skipped the liquid phase entirely. They hung in the desert air like a slow-motion snowfall, catching the low sun, turning the workshop into something out of a winter cathedral. It works, Finn whispered, then louder. It works! I took the endothermic magic stone he had just generated, a pale blue crystal that radiated cold the way his firestones radiated heat, and slotted it into the radiator core. The thermal loop closed. Heat from the engine fed into Finn's endothermic core, which converted it back into cold and recycled it through the mithril pipes. Near perfect thermal efficiency. The system would run until the magic stones degraded and orichalcum-housed stones degraded slowly. I turned the key. The engine did not roar. It breathed, a quiet intake, deep and steady, like a sleeping giant's heartbeat. Frost formed on the body panels, silver and gold streamlining over an orichalcum skeleton, mithril veins carrying cold through the entire frame. The Giga Frost Nova. Beatrice climbed into the driver's throne. She pressed her palms flat against the dash. It is light, she said. Master, my magic flows through the whole body like my own limbs. Sierra settled into the navigator's seat. The heartbeat is clear, she said. Mina jumped in the back. Lulu followed, bouncing on the seat. Finn held out the magic key. Yours, he said. I do not need money. This is tuition for what you taught me about thermodynamics. Fair trade. I took the key. I did not turn down the gift. 2 days later, we rolled out. The Nova moved in silence, frost forming on the body panels, even at idle cold air visible around the wheels like low fog. Beatrice held the weight reduction at a resting cast. Sierra navigated. Mina and Lulu sat in the back, comparing the old truck seats to the new ones. The new ones were winning. We found Goldwyn inside the hour. The Giga Frost Dragoon Custom was half buried in sand. Suspension snapped, tires flat, engine dead and cold for the first time since I built it, which was the wrong kind of cold. The cold of a machine that would never start again without the people who made it run. Goldwyn's soldiers and his legal official were unconscious in the sand, faces blistered from dehydration. Goldwyn himself was in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, refusing to leave the cabin of a truck that had become a metal oven. I rolled down the window. The cold air poured out into the desert in a visible wave. Goldwyn staggered out of the wreck. He ran to the Nova on legs that barely held him. He grabbed the window frame. He begged me to fix his truck. He offered gold. He offered his entire trading company. I looked at him. "That truck is your property," I said. "Take good care of it." I rolled up the window. I did not look at him again. Finn popped up from the passenger seat, leaned out the window, and waved at Goldwyn with a cheerfulness that bordered on cruelty. "Nice to meet you," he called down. "I am the Empire's head mage. Take care of yourself out here." Goldwyn's face went the color of old paper. Finn opened the door, stepped onto the sand, and ignited a thermal updraft beneath his feet. Heat pushed downward. His body lifted upward, the new endothermic control giving him flight stability he had never had before. He rose into the desert sky in a column of shimmering air, laughing. "Kent," he called back, "I will master ice magic next. When I am finished, I will come show you." He banked north and was gone, a bright speck against the orange sky, then nothing. I put the Nova in gear. Goldwyn was still standing in the sand behind us, shrinking in the rear view. Sierra spoke from the navigator's seat. "Master, Finn's magical sound has changed." She paused, choosing her words. "It used to be a violent roar that burned everything it touched. Now it is cold and clear and intelligent, but the enormity underneath is even greater than before." Beatrice met my eyes in the mirror. "Master," she said quietly, "did that man not just say something terrible at the end?" I drove. The frost on the body panels caught the last of the sunset. Mina was cheering that the new truck was super comfy. Lulu reported that the seats were fluffy. I had just taught the most powerful mage in the Empire how to subtract heat. He had already figured out flight from it. He was promising to master ice. The man who could vaporize a mountain was now learning how to freeze one. My stomach started hurting for an entirely new reason. The Nova had been perfect for 6 days. On the 7th, Sierra pulled her headphones off one ear and tilted her head. "There is noise," she said softly, underneath the heartbeat. Metal touching metal where it should not. I pulled over. The engine hood came up on a seamless silver and gold block. Orichalcum kneaded into mithril. No bolts, no seams, no access panels. Finn had built this thing the way a fire mage builds anything, by force, with zero thought for what happens when something wears. My magic could reach absolute 0 or 1,000 degrees, but friction was mechanical. I could not reshape a tolerance I could not see. At this rate, the engine would seize within the week. I canceled the next delivery and limped the Nova back to Frozen Station at a speed that embarrassed the horse carts passing us. Mina and Lulu pressed their noses to the rear window and waved at every farmer who overtook us. Beatrice folded her arms and warned me that dwarves were a difficult race to negotiate with. Sarah looked up from her account books when we rolled into the yard. I told her the engine was dying. She did not blink. "Go to Iron Geo," she said. "Western Mountains. I know a mechanic there. Hates magic, loves gears and iron. Eccentric, but if anyone can crack your shiny coffin, it is her." We drove north the next morning at walking pace. The Western Mountains rose out of the plains like a granite wall. Iron Geo's gates were enormous, twin slabs of carved stone wide enough for 6 wagons abreast, and they were shut. A crowd of soot-covered miners sat in the dirt outside, some holding their heads, some staring at nothing. A miner with bloodshot eyes told me what happened. Toxic gas had erupted from a new vein deep underground, invisible, odorless. The giant ventilation fan had broken under the pressure. Dozens of miners were still trapped below. Inside the gate, dwarven mages raised their staves and blasted wind magic straight into the tunnel. The compressed gas rebounded. Every mage collapsed, coughing. I stepped forward before they could try again. "Stop. What you are doing is finishing off your comrades. Air pressure inward compresses the gas deeper. You need exhaust, not intake." The mages stared. One of them started to argue that they were trying to save their people. I did not have time to debate fluid dynamics with a man who had just knocked himself unconscious with his own spell. Mina pulled at my sleeve. "Uncle Kent, can you help them?" Before I could answer, a voice cut through the crowd, high, furious, and young. "If magic does not work, fix the machine. Our lifeline is not spells. It is gears and iron." A small figure in soot-stained work clothes shoved past the adults and climbed onto a rusty auxiliary exhaust pump beside the gate. She had goggles pushed up on her forehead, oil on both cheeks, and a wrench half her height braced across her shoulders. She jammed it into the pump's crank and threw her whole body into the stroke. The pump groaned. A thin ribbon of gas trickled out, nowhere near enough. I watched her for 3 seconds. The way she read the mechanism, the way her hands found the valve clearance by feel alone. I recognized a peer. I walked up to the pump and spoke in the only language she would respect. "Crank stroke is too short. Cylinder diameter gives you insufficient compression ratio and displacement. You could turn that handle for a week and not move enough volume. She swung the wrench at my head. I leaned back. She missed by a handspan and did not apologize. You are not wrong, I said, but I have something better. I pointed at the Nova. My truck's engine can be your exhaust source. I am a transporter. I know machines. She stared at the Nova for 2 full seconds, then walked over and pressed her palm flat against the side panel. Her eyes went unfocused. When they came back, her expression had changed. What a heartbeat, she breathed. Not a single bolt, not a single screw hole, a seamless black box. Her lip curled. What kind of perverted genius built this thing? A fire mage who does not think about maintenance. Beautiful. And a nightmare. She grinned around the wrench handle. I am in. What is the plan? I laid it out fast. Hot air rises. Cold air sinks. If we pump the Nova's superheated exhaust into the tunnel at the main entrance, and I channel freezing air into the secondary intake vent on the mountainside, the temperature differential creates a convection current, a chimney effect. The toxic gas gets pulled upward through the natural ventilation shaft and erupts out the mountaintop. Insane logic, she said. Then she laughed. Completely insane. Let us do it. Beatrice carried the heaviest iron duct pipe in Iron Geo with one hand. I heat welded the joints, superheated each section until the metal expanded, fitted the next piece, then flash cooled. Every seal airtight in under 10 seconds. The dwarf girl watched each weld and whispered that my precision was terrifying. I backed the Nova to the tunnel mouth and revved the engine to full thermal output. Superheated exhaust roared through the ductwork and into the deep mine. Then I walked to the secondary vent on the mountainside and pushed cold across my palms, tens of degrees below zero, sinking into the shaft like an invisible river. The differential caught. Hot air climbed. Cold air fell. The convection loop locked in and began to pull. A black plume of toxic gas erupted from the mountaintop vent. The dwarven mages staggered back from the blast of pressure. The crowd gasped and then went silent, watching the poison pour out of their mountain like smoke from a chimney. Sierra spoke over the radio from the gate. Heartbeats calming. The people inside, they are breathing easier. All of them. Tens of minutes. That was all it took. The gas cleared. Dwarven rescue teams poured into the tunnel. The miners came out unconscious, but breathing. Mina spread cotton beds across the plaza as fast as her hands could work. Thick, soft, absorbent. Lulu sealed each miner's head inside an airtight bubble, and I fed cool, clean air through each one. Improvised oxygen tents, field built in minutes. Sierra listened at the gate and confirmed what mattered. 0 deaths. Every heartbeat is strong. The crowd erupted. Dwarves hoisted the 2 of us, me and the girl with the wrench, onto their shoulders and carried us in a circuit around the gate plaza. I had not been carried by anyone since I was 6 years old in my first life. The girl looked like she had not been carried ever. Her name was Vulcan. She told me that while dangling from a miner's arm with her wrench still in her hand. When the celebration settled, Vulcan walked straight back to the Nova and put her palm on the engine block. I used temperature manipulation to release the shrink fit, a brief pulse of localized heat that loosened the structural tolerances just enough for her to reach inside. She closed her eyes and listened through the metal. 3 minutes. Her fingers moved across surfaces I could not see. Cylinder 3, she said. 0.2 millimeter clearance deficiency at bottom dead center. Your fire mage friend built the tolerance too tight. The piston has been scraping since day 1. I superheated the defect zone. Vulcan machined a new oil groove with a dwarven precision tool that hummed against the metal like a tuning fork. 20 minutes. The grinding noise that had haunted the engine for a week went silent. I ran the engine. The Nova purred, not a whisper of friction. You just fixed what I could not touch, I told her. She shrugged and balanced the wrench on her shoulder. Of course, who do you think I am? The genius mechanic of Iron Geo. She paused. Your truck is a perverted masterpiece. I want to be its doctor. I offered her an exclusive technician contract, full salary, ownership of all maintenance work, profit share on revenue. She accepted on one condition: she would not travel. She needed solid ground and a real workshop. I shook her hand. We drove home the same day. Mina and Lulu hit the lobby at a run. We are home! Big sister Sarah! Sarah looked past them at the small soot-stained dwarf standing in the doorway with a wrench across her shoulders. She looked at me. She looked back at Vulcan. Something calculated behind her eyes in under 3 seconds. So you brought her, Sarah said. The eccentric from Iron Geo. The genius mechanic, Vulcan corrected. She was already sizing up the garage. Sarah leaned on the counter. How about this? I provide the location, the customer network, and the logistics contracts. You provide the engineering. We split the maintenance revenue 50-50. Vulcan did not even pause. 60-40. My tools are worth more than your desert. 50-50. My desert has the only truck stop between the capital and the southern sea. Vulcan's grin spread. Deal. They shook hands. The partnership was sealed in under a minute. Beatrice appeared from the courtyard, saw the handshake, and went pale. She leaned close to my ear. Master, she whispered, the vixen has increased to 2. I did not respond. I was already calculating what the next quarter's revenue looked like, with 2 profit-minded women running the base while I drove. Over the following days, the garage transformed. Overhead cranes, hydraulic jacks, precision machine tools, a heated and cooled paint bay. Vulcan also handed me a small device, a sound collecting tool enchanted with a transmission spell. She could hear the Nova's heartbeat from Frozen Station while I was anywhere on the continent. Remote diagnostics. The next delivery contract came in. We loaded. Sarah and Vulcan stood together in the loading bay and watched us roll out. Sarah with her arms folded, Vulcan beside her. Mina waved from the back window. Lulu pressed her face to the glass and fogged it with her breath. The Nova's engine ran silent under the desert sky. No grinding, no friction, just the clean thermal pulse that Sierra called its heartbeat, steady and strong. The company was 6, and for the first time since I started this business, I felt like the machine was complete. We were 2 days out from Vulcan's engine overhaul and rolling toward the next contract when Sierra pulled her headphones tight and pointed straight up. Something was falling. A black shape punched into the desert 50 meters ahead of the Nova and kicked up a ring of dust. I braked hard. By the time I got to the crater, the shape had wings. Black feathered wings, one of them bent wrong at the joint, and a young man clutching a leather pouch to his chest like it was the last thing left in the world. Henry, a birdman, late teens, hollow-boned, built for the sky the way a paper plane is built for a classroom. Mina wrapped his broken wing in cotton before he even woke up. When he did, the first thing out of his mouth was a plea. His sky city in the northern mountains had been cut off by an avalanche the size of a district. The Flying Dragon mail service had crashed in the blizzard. He was the last courier alive, and the only thing he could carry was one letter. I asked the obvious question. He answered it before I finished. "We have hollow bones," Henry said. His voice cracked. "I can carry one letter, not one barrel." His eyes drifted to the Nova's cargo container. He begged me to fly the truck to the city. I told him trucks did not fly. Vulcan's voice came over the radio from the loading bay, sharp and delighted. "Don't underestimate what I tuned, Kent. That engine output, the orichalcum chassis, your thermal updraft, Beatrice's weight magic, and a set of folding wings I forge overnight. I can make that iron box fly." She called it the most insane modification she had ever proposed, and she was laughing when she said it. I ran the numbers in my head. Lift coefficient, wing area, exhaust thrust at full thermal output. My warehouse brain had spent 20 years calculating cargo volume in 3 dimensions. Fluid dynamics was the same math rotated 90 degrees. The numbers closed. I said yes. Beatrice went pale. "Master, I am a knight of the earth. My feet belong on the ground." Nobody acknowledged her objection. Mina and Lulu were already cheering about touching clouds. Vulcan heated the first steel plate before I hung up the radio. We worked through the night. Vulcan swung her hammer at sheets of orichalcum reinforced steel, while I superheated the wing roots for shrink-fit welds that fused at a molecular level. Her metal dialogue placed every mount at the optimal load point. By dawn, the Gigafrost Nova had folding wings pinned against its sides, like a sleeping dragon, and a tail fin at the rear for yaw stability. Henry stared at it and laughed. "A metal box with iron feathers. That thing will drop like a stone." I knelt in the sand and drew a wing cross-section with my finger. Curved surface on top, flat on the bottom. Air moves faster over the curve. Pressure drops. The wing lifts. I told him it was called the Bernoulli principle, and it was older than Birdman. He did not look convinced. Sarah waved from the loading bay. "Come back in one piece." Vulcan stood beside her, arms folded, oil on her cheek, grinning. She had built the wings. She was not coming along. She needed solid ground and a real workshop, but the pride on her face said she was flying with us anyway. I boarded the truck. Henry took the passenger seat. Beatrice climbed into the back and immediately gripped the underside of her bench. Mina bounced. Lulu asked if clouds tasted like cotton candy. I pointed the Nova at the cliff edge a kilometer ahead and floored the accelerator. The speedometer climbed past 100, past 110, past 120. Henry saw the edge coming. "There is nothing beyond that cliff." I know, I said. That is our runway. Beatrice screamed and cast weight reduction. The Nova went weightless, sailed off the edge of the world, and fell. 2 seconds of freefall. My stomach hit my throat. Then I redirected the Nova's superheated exhaust straight down, and a thermal column punched the truck upward like a fist under a paper lantern. The folding wings snapped open. Bernoulli took hold. The fall became a climb. We were flying. Mina pressed her face to the window. Lulu blew a tiny celebratory bubble. Beatrice was curled under her seat with her eyes shut, whispering something about solid ground. I handed Henry a cold fruit juice. "Enjoy the comfortable sky voyage," I said. He took the juice without blinking. His expression said his entire understanding of flight had just been rewritten by a truck. Sierra put on her headphones and reported trouble. Thick clouds ahead, violent wind, the sound of ice particles colliding, the same blizzard that had wiped out the Dragon Air Express. I gripped the wheel. We hit the storm wall and everything went black. Sierra called obstacles in fragments. Right bow, ice mass. Left stern, gust. The truck lurched sideways and the cargo containers groaned. Henry shouted what I already knew. The truck was too light. At near zero mass, every gust was a wrecking ball. We were a leaf. I needed Beatrice. Not her fear, not her apologies, her precision. Beatrice, I kept my voice level. I need you to selectively cancel your weight reduction. When Sierra calls a gust from the left, you restore full orichalcum mass to the left side for a quarter second. The mass absorbs the gust. Then you relighten. Sierra reads the wind. You control the weight. Together, you gyroscope this truck. Silence from the back seat. Then Sierra spoke, soft and certain. My ears and your power, Beatrice. Together, we will make his path. Something shifted. When Beatrice answered, the trembling was gone. Understood, Master. This vehicle will never fall. Sierra called left bow. Gust incoming. Beatrice restored mass to the left for a heartbeat. The truck held. Sierra called right stern. Ice mass. Beatrice shifted. The truck dodged. They fell into a rhythm faster than I could follow. Sierra naming threats 2 seconds before they hit. Beatrice canceling and restoring weight in quarter-second pulses. The truck stopped lurching and began to glide. Stable, perfectly trimmed. A gyroscope made of trust and timing. Henry watched them with his mouth open. Even sky monsters with wind-reading instinct cannot achieve that kind of attitude control. Mina pressed cotton padding against the walls wherever turbulence rattled them. The ride smoothed. We climbed through the storm and broke into thinner air above. 3,000 meters. My head pounded. Beatrice went pale. The air was thinning fast. Henry clutched the window frame. This is the death zone. Only birdmen and flying dragons survive this high. The air is too thin. Humans will die. I ordered Lulu to seal the cabin. Every window, every vent, every gap. She cast a multi-layer bubble film across the interior surfaces, unbreakable and airtight. Then I pushed heat into the trapped air. Boil Charles. Heated gas expands. In a sealed volume, pressure rises. I raised the internal temperature until the cabin read 1 atmosphere at 24 degrees. The headache vanished. Beatrice exhaled and straightened. Lulu pressed her cheek against her own bubble wall and smiled. Henry stared at the warm cabin. We birdmen endure frozen winds and thin air at this altitude. What is this? Aerial logistics, I said. The frost on the windows cleared as we climbed past 5,000 meters. Sierra pressed her headphones tight. She pointed forward. Master, ahead. There is a sound like a wall, the blizzard wall. A white swirling mass the size of a mountain range, blocking the path to the Sky City completely. I could not punch through it. The wind resistance alone would tear the wings off. Henry stood up. His bandaged wing twitched. Wind resistance is my specialty. He looked at me directly. I can read gaps in the wind that no ground creature ever could. If I fly ahead through the wall and cut a low resistance corridor, your truck can follow in my slipstream. I told him his wing was not healed. I am the courier, he said. This is my work. There was nothing in his voice that wanted to be argued with. He had carried one letter across a death zone to beg for help. The help had come. The last stretch was his. Lulu opened the hatch with a precise bubble seal modulation, a hole just wide enough for a birdman. Henry leaped into the white void. Sierra tracked his flight path by sound. She fed me his coordinates in real time. I threaded the Nova half a second behind him, riding the corridor he carved through the wind wall. The pressure on the chassis dropped to nearly nothing. We passed through the blizzard in seconds. Clear sky. Below us, a stone city built into a mortar-shaped mountaintop. Henry's home. I braked with reverse thermal thrust, and Beatrice restored the Nova's full weight in a single pulse. The truck landed in the city square with the heavy finality of something that had no business being in the sky admitting it. Henry collapsed beside us, exhausted, wings shaking, but he was smiling. The residents had been starving, wrapped in thin blankets, hollow-eyed, huddled around empty fire pits. They stared at the silver truck like it was a hallucination. Henry raised one trembling wing and told them he had brought help. The cargo doors opened. Wheat flour, dried meat, blankets, firewood, magic stones. Hundreds of tons of supplies that one courier could never have carried and one truck should never have flown. I watched a grandmother press her face into a sack of flour and hold it the way people hold something they thought they would never see again. Children swarmed the wheat. The city wept. Henry found me at the truck door. He held out his hand. "A courier carries what a courier can carry," he said. Together, we delivered what one alone could not. I shook his hand. The Sky City paid in magic stones, the only export they had left, and it was more than fair. We refueled and departed. The breached blizzard wall was easier the second time through. The Nova landed at Frozen Station the next morning with its wings folded against the chassis like nothing had happened. Sarah opened a new column in the account book. She wrote one word at the top: Sky. Beatrice was in the garage before anyone else. She sat on an overturned crate with her old greatsword across her knees, running a polishing cloth along the flat of the blade in slow circles. The lamp above her head threw a hard orange ring on the concrete floor and left everything outside it dark. She did not know I was watching from the corridor. I had come down to check the Nova's tire pressure, and I stopped at the door when I heard her talking to herself. Not talking, lamenting. Her magic made the sword light enough to swing at any speed she wanted, but lightness was the problem. A featherweight blade at any velocity delivered featherweight impact. She had carried crates the size of houses. She had stabilized a flying truck through a death zone blizzard with quarter-second mass pulses. And she still could not cut through heavy armor because the thing in her hands weighed nothing at the moment it mattered. She set the polishing cloth down and stared at the blade like it owed her something. Vulcan appeared from behind the Nova's rear axle, wiping her hands on a rag. The dwarf had been listening too. She watched Beatrice for a moment, then walked to the far corner of the garage where a tarpaulin covered something tall and wide against the wall. She pulled the cover off in one motion. Underneath was a sword, wrapped in oiled canvas, propped upright, longer than Beatrice was tall. Beatrice saw the shape. Her hands went still. Vulcan dragged the bundle to the workbench. She could barely shift it. The metal feet of the bench groaned when she heaved one end onto the surface. She peeled the canvas back. The blade underneath was pure orichalcum, head to hilt. No alloy, no composite, no compromise. The same metal as the Nova's chassis, forged from the leftover material of the last overhaul. It caught the lamplight and threw it back in a cold, pale gold. Even on the bench, it looked like something that did not belong to individual people. Vulcan folded her arms. "Your sword is too light," she said. "It has always been too light, so the answer is obvious." She kicked the bench leg. The orichalcum blade did not move. "Swing one that is too heavy." Beatrice reached for the hilt. She closed her fingers around the grip without casting. The sword did not budge. She braced her legs, pulled with both arms, and the blade scraped 3 centimeters across the bench surface before her boots slid on the concrete. Vulcan had not been able to lift one end more than a few centimeters off the table. No one in the company could. No one in the kingdom's Knight Order could. The mass of pure orichalcum at that length was beyond what muscle alone could address. "Now cast," Vulcan said. Beatrice cast weight reduction. The orichalcum responded instantly. She lifted the greatsword off the bench with 2 fingers and held it overhead. It moved like air. She turned it in a slow arc above her head. The blade was enormous and it weighed nothing. Vulcan held up one stubby finger. "Swing under the cast. Build speed. Then cancel at the millimeter of impact. The mass comes back in the same instant the edge meets the target. Every gram of orichalcum, every unit of velocity, all of it delivered at a single contact point. The kinetic energy will be," she paused and sniffed, "total." Beatrice looked at the blade above her. "And the recoil? Recast immediately after impact. Cancel the inertia returning to your shoulders before your joints feel it. You have been parallel casting through turbulence at quarter-second intervals for months. This is the same timing." Beatrice set an empty supply crate on the floor. She reduced the sword to nothing, swung once, and canceled at the point of contact. There was no sound. The crate was simply not there anymore. Splinters radiated outward across the garage floor in a perfect circle. Her grip had not shifted. Her stance had not broken. She lowered the blade and rested it across her shoulder. Her voice was quiet, not performing, not grandstanding, just the voice of someone holding the right tool for the first time. With this, I finally have the best weapon. Vulcan grinned and turned back to her workbench without another word. She had forged the sword in secret because she had not wanted to build expectations before the orichalcum proved it would behave. It had behaved. That was enough for her. I stepped out of the corridor before Beatrice noticed me. By the time I reached the counter, Sarah was already holding a communication crystal with both hands, and her jaw was tight. Emergency SOS from the guild. A fortress on the kingdom's eastern front had been besieged by a monster horde for 6 days. Supply lines cut. Garrison of several thousand soldiers starving. Magic bombardment from the horde had not let up since the siege began. The job offer carried the highest difficulty surcharge in the guild's rate book. Highest surcharge means highest pay, Sarah said. She spread the map on the counter and tapped the fortress with her finger. Eastern Mountain Pass. One road in. The road is the horde. I told her to load the Nova. Mina and Lulu were already moving crates. Sierra fitted her headphones and tested the acoustic range on the loading bay door. Beatrice came through the garage entrance with the orichalcum greatsword strapped across her back. It was enormous. The hilt rose above her right shoulder and the tip nearly touched the ground behind her left heel. Under the weight reduction cast, it sat against her spine like it was made of paper. I waited until the cargo bay was sealed and the team had gathered at the cab. Then I told them one thing I had been holding back. The knight commander stationed at that fortress was the same man who had exiled Beatrice from the Royal Knights. The man who had called her the Feather Sword. The man who had told her that a weightless blade was a cotton toy and sent her out of the order with nothing. Beatrice's expression did not change. She adjusted the strap across her chest. I am no longer that pitiful knight of the past, master. Her tone was flat and clean. I am a senior executive of Kent Transport. I would very much like to show the commander the weight of my work. Sierra tilted her head. She said nothing, but I saw her listening to something the rest of us could not hear. The Nova rolled out of Frozen Station at dawn with 8 tons of food, water, arrows, whetstones, and spare swords in the cargo bay, the great sword in the cabin, and a woman who had waited 9 months for a door she no longer needed to walk through. The fortress sat in a mountain pass with stone walls 3 stories tall and a gate that had been barricaded from the inside. The plain below the hilltop was not a plain anymore. It was a horde. Goblins, orcs, trolls, chimeras, shoulder to shoulder, stretched from the base of the hill to the fortress walls in every direction. Magic bombardment arced upward from the swarm in waves. Fire spells, rock projectiles, green-black poison clouds. The walls were scorched and cracked. Beatrice leaned forward in the passenger seat. Master, that barrage density is severe. Even the Nova's armor would take damage in a frontal approach. She was right. A straight charge through that mess would cost us panels and possibly a wheel. I had a different idea. I cast temperature manipulation on the air around the Nova's chassis. A thin layer of superheated air directly above the roof. A thin layer of supercooled air directly below the undercarriage. The temperature differential created a refractive index gradient that bent incoming light around the truck the way a heat haze bends a road on a summer afternoon. Except I was not bending one angle. I was bending all of them. The Nova shimmered. Then it was not there. Sierra confirmed. The sound profile has changed. Reflections from the chassis have become diffuse. Visually, the truck is gone. I put the truck in gear and drove straight down the hill into the horde. Sierra called threats the way she had called them through the Sky City blizzard. Fire spell incoming at starboard, distance 100. Rock projectile at port stern, 50. I threaded the Nova between impacts. The monsters fired at dust clouds and heat shimmer where the truck's apparent silhouette had been a second earlier. None of them could see us. What they could feel was the invisible mass of the Nova plowing through their ranks. Bodies flew. Formations shattered. Panic spread outward from the truck's path like a ripple in water. We reached the fortress gate. I dropped the Mirage. The Nova materialized in the courtyard in a flash of silver and gold. The soldiers stopped mid-breath. They had been preparing for a final charge. Battered armor, hollow eyes, swords so dull they would not cut bread. They stared at the truck like a man in the desert stares at water he does not trust. Then the knight commander strode into the courtyard. He was in ornate armor, cracked at the shoulder plate and streaked with soot. soot. His retinue followed, a dozen knights in formation behind him, hands on hilts, faces set in the rigid posture of men performing authority they no longer felt. He saw Beatrice step down from the cab. The orichalcum greatsword rose above her shoulder like a monument. His mouth opened. He knew her face. The commander's words came out the way they always had. Loud, public, aimed at the retinue more than at her. He called her the exiled feather sword. He asked what she was doing dragging her useless magic into a battlefield. He called her an incompetent who could not swing a proper blade. His knights laughed. The sound was thin and tired, but they laughed because the commander expected them to. Beatrice did not look at him. She told him, in a voice so flat it could have been reading a shipping label, that she had not come to help him. She had come to complete a delivery job from the guild. She walked to the cargo door. She opened it. 8 tons of food, water, arrows, whetstones, spare swords. She placed 2 fingers under the first stack of crates, cast weight reduction, and lifted the entire column with one hand. The stack was the size of a small house. She set it on the courtyard tile without a sound. The garrison soldiers stared. A few of them dropped to their knees. The commander's face went red. He shouted that if she had magic at that output, she should have used it for attack instead of wasting it on carrying luggage. He called her ability a disgrace to the knightly profession. Beatrice picked up the next stack. She set it down. She did not answer him. She did not look at him. Looking at him would have meant his judgment still mattered. It did not. The starving soldiers swarmed the food. Some of them wept openly. Mina and Lulu watched from the cabin window, quiet for once. Sierra had her headphones pressed tight, listening to a courtyard full of heartbeats, shifting from despair to something brighter. Then the ground shook. Not a tremor, a concussion. The fortress wall facing east exploded inward in a spray of stone and mortar, and through the breach came something that made the entire horde look like an escort. The armored behemoth. 4 legs, each one as thick as a fortress column. A body the size of a building, low to the ground, covered head to tail in steel plate carapace that caught the mid-morning sun and threw it back in dull iron flashes. Red eyes, set deep behind armored ridges. The courtyard tile cracked under its weight with every step. The garrison panicked. The commander rallied his knights. They attacked with the fresh greatswords from our delivery, magic reinforced, the best steel in the kingdom. The blades shattered at the hilt without leaving a scratch on the armor plate. The mages cast explosion, the Empire's top-tier fire spell. The blast washed across the behemoth's carapace and dissipated like water on hot stone. Not a scorch mark. The commander stood in the smoke with a broken hilt in his hand and nothing left in his doctrine. I watched from behind the Nova. 3 seconds of calculation. Armor mass in the range of 1,500 tons. Ablative threshold against kinetic energy higher than any conventional weapon swing could produce. Fire magic useless because the thermal conductivity of that carapace was near 0. The only thing that could breach it was a high mass impact delivered at a velocity no human arm could achieve through normal physics. I looked at Beatrice. She had already drawn the orichalcum greatsword from her back. She told the soldiers to step back. Her voice carried across the courtyard without effort. "You are interfering with the delivery work." The commander started to shout something. Beatrice walked past him. She did not look at him. She walked into the open space between the retreating knights and the behemoth, the orichalcum greatsword resting across her shoulder, and stopped. She canceled weight reduction. The blade's true mass returned in an instant. Pure orichalcum, head to hilt. Every gram of it obedient to gravity again. The sword fell from her shoulder and hit the courtyard stone. The impact cracked the pavement in a crater 4 meters wide. Fragments of tile flew outward. The ground shook. The commander's mouth moved. He saw a sword that no living person could lift lying in a crater of its own making. Beatrice recast. The blade rose like a feather. She lifted it overhead with one hand. Then she ran. Her first footfall cracked the stone from the explosive force of her acceleration. The second shattered it. She covered the distance between herself and the behemoth in 2 seconds. The air split around her. A sound like a whip crack rolled across the courtyard, loud enough to make the soldiers flinch. She was moving at supersonic speed, the orichalcum blade above her head, weightless, frictionless, trailing a faint shimmer where displaced air folded in her wake. The behemoth turned its head. Its red eyes found the silver-haired woman and the blade above her. The commander had just enough time to think what he had always thought, that a light sword could cut nothing. Beatrice canceled the spell. The orichalcum mass returned to the blade at the millimeter of impact. every gram, every ton. The velocity did not change. The mass did. The kinetic energy delivered at the contact point was the product of 1,500 tons of orichalcum momentum meeting the speed of sound at a single edge. The behemoth's armor plate did not crack. It disintegrated. The strike continued through the body. The creature, mountain-sized, impervious to the kingdom's strongest weapons and magic, was lifted off its 4 legs by the force of the blow and sent flying across the courtyard. It smashed through what remained of the eastern wall and came to rest in the rubble beyond, motionless, silent, finished. The courtyard went quiet. Not the quiet of relief, not the quiet of victory. The quiet of people who had just watched physics break a rule they thought was permanent. Knights who had sworn oaths on the supremacy of fire magic stood with empty hands and open mouths. Beatrice stood in the center of the courtyard. Her stance was perfect. She had recast weight reduction on the blade the instant after contact, absorbing the recoil before it reached her shoulders. Her arms had not been jolted. Her grip had not shifted. She rested the greatsword across her shoulder and exhaled. The remaining monster horde beyond the broken wall had watched their boss die. Tens of thousands of them. They scattered. The predatory instinct that had held the swarm together snapped when the alpha fell, and the horde fled into the wilderness in every direction. Within minutes, the plane was empty. I stayed behind the Nova. I had watched the strike from the driver's side door with my hand still on the frame. The physics had been exactly what I calculated. The result had been exactly what Vulcan forged for. This was not my scene. This was hers. The commander dropped to his knees. His ornate armor scraped against the courtyard stone. He pitched forward onto his hands. He crawled through the mud toward Beatrice, his gauntlets sinking into the wet debris. His face a thing I did not bother studying closely. He apologized. He said he understood now how foolish he had been. He said he had never known she had such power. He begged her to return to the Knights. He said the kingdom needed her overwhelming strength. He offered her the position of vice commander. Then he stopped, swallowed, and offered his own seat. He would surrender the commander's position. He would step down. He was still crawling when he said it. One ragged fragment reached me clearly. Please, come back. Beatrice looked down at him, briefly, then past him. I declined. Her voice did not rise. She did not glare. She did not lecture him about the years of exile, the cotton sword mockery, the morning she stood in the guild lobby, wiping her own job, posting off the board because no one had answered it. She said none of that. She did not need to. The courtyard had already said it for her. I have no interest in barbaric acts of displaying power. I am simply a delivery person now. She adjusted the strap across her back. I am truly proud to be an executive of Kent Transport. She turned away from him. She walked back toward the truck. She did not glance back. The commander was still on his knees in the mud, with his mouth open and nothing left to offer. Mina and Lulu burst out of the cab. Mina reached Beatrice first and threw her arms around her waist. Lulu wrapped herself around Beatrice's leg and looked up at her. The big sword went whoosh. Beatrice placed one hand on Mina's head and one on Lulu's. She did not say anything to them. She did not need to. Sierra leaned out of the cabin window. Her voice was soft, the way it always was when she was reading something the rest of us could not hear. Good work, Beatrice. Your heartbeat. It was very tight before. Compressed, like something held too long. She paused. It is clear now, and bright. The quartermaster met me at the driver's side door. He was the practical kind, not a battle-obsessed fool, not a glory chaser. He understood that a fortress runs on food and steel before it runs on speeches. He handed me a leather bag, heavy with coin, and held out a receipt. I signed it. Fix the holes in the wall, I told him. He nodded. He did not ask how we had gotten through the horde. He did not ask about the behemoth. He had watched the delivery arrive and the delivery leave, and that was enough. Beatrice climbed into the cab. The greatsword went into the back seat. Mina and Lulu settled in beside it, still clinging to Beatrice's arms. Sierra had her headphones on, already reading the road ahead. I started the engine. Good work, I said. I kept my eyes on the gate. Our executive. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was the voice of someone who had set something down and did not intend to pick it up again. Thank you, Master. Let us return to delivery work. The Nova rolled out of the fortress courtyard. We passed the breach in the eastern wall where the behemoth's body lay in the rubble. We passed the empty plain where tens of thousands of monsters had stood an hour ago. We passed the hill where I had engaged the mirage. I did not look back at the fortress. Neither did Beatrice. Mina fell asleep against Beatrice's shoulder. Lulu fell asleep against Mina. The greatsword sat upright between them like a monument nobody needed to explain. The Nova rolled east. There was a next job waiting. There always was. The communication crystal had been pulsing red for 40 seconds before Sarah picked it up. I knew it was bad because she did not speak while she listened. Sarah always talked back. When she went quiet, the news was the kind that did not fit inside a sentence. She set the crystal down and looked at me. "Adventurers Guild Emergency Channel," she said. The water capital had flooded. A record rainfall had collapsed the central dam, and the river delta basin that held the continent's largest logistics hub was now under tens of meters of muddy water. Rescue boats sank the moment they reached the outer current. Air routes were sealed by a storm cell sitting directly over the basin. Tens of thousands of citizens trapped on upper floors and rooftops with the water still rising. And something else. A water dragon had surfaced in the flood. Every rescue attempt that made it past the current was driven back by the creature. The guild had classified the mission as impossible. Sarah tapped the map. The water capital was 200 kilometers south through dry plain and then river lowland. She did not say what she was thinking, but her eyes said it clearly enough. This was the largest population center on the continent, and it was drowning. I opened my mouth to answer. Sierra spoke first. She was standing in the kitchen doorway. Her headphones were around her neck. Her posture was the same careful stillness she always carried, but her hands were pressed flat against her thighs, and I could see the tendons in her wrists. "That city is my hometown." The kitchen went quiet. Mina stopped mid-step with a water pitcher in both hands. Lulu looked up from the table. Beatrice set down the maintenance log she had been reading. Sierra did not raise her voice. She delivered the rest of it in the same soft, careful register she used to call navigation headings during a storm. Her clan was a prestigious mage family that ruled the water capital. They worshipped light. Their magic was beautiful, flashy water and light manipulation that the kingdom's aristocrats paid fortunes to watch. And she had been born blind. A blind child in a clan that defined itself by sight. Defective, they called her. Not broken, not sick. Defective, the word for a cracked lens or a misfired spell. They put her out of the clan house when she was small enough that the alley she landed in was wider than her arms could reach. Her voice did not waver while she said it. The cost of that control was not in her voice. It was in her hands, still pressed flat against her thighs, and in the careful angle of her chin, tilted slightly upward as if she were reading something none of us could see. "I would like to navigate this rescue," she said, "if you will allow it." I looked at her. 9 phases. She had guided us through a sandstorm with visibility measured in the length of a hand. She had threaded a blizzard at altitude with quarter-second calls. She had read the heartbeat of every person inside a besieged fortress and told me which walls were safe to approach. She had earned the right to choose her own missions a long time ago. "Suit up," I said. "We leave within the hour." Vulcan was already in the garage when I came down the stairs. She had heard the SOS through the workshop intercom, and she had the Nova's undercarriage panels off before I reached the bay. I told her what we needed. The Nova had to dive. Full submersion, zero visibility muddy water, violent currents, whirlpools the size of houses. It needed to sink on command, rise on command, and move through the flood like a torpedo. Vulcan stared at me for 3 seconds. Then she pulled a wrench from her belt, cracked a grin, and started welding. The conversion was not complicated in principle. The Nova's body was already seamless. Lulu's airtight bubble could envelop the entire truck in a pressurized shell, leaving one intake point open. Vulcan welded pipes and valves onto the cargo container to create an improvised ballast tank. Fill the tank with floodwater and the truck sinks. For surfacing, Beatrice's weight reduction on the whole chassis would drop the effective mass below the displaced water, and the Nova would rise. 3-dimensional buoyancy control using magic the team already had. For propulsion, I would use the muddy water itself. My temperature manipulation could superheat a patch of water behind the truck into steam in under a second. Water expanding into vapor occupies 1,700 times its liquid volume. That expansion behind a sealed vehicle in a flooded channel was a free torpedo engine. Vulcan finished the last valve weld, stepped back, and looked at the Nova the way she looked at every machine she had just modified. Half disgust, half pride. "Perverted masterpiece," she said. She wiped her hands on a rag and tossed me a diagnostic relay. "Bring my truck back without a scratch, or I am billing you for the paint." The Nova reached the basin rim at dusk. I parked on the cliff edge, and the team looked down at what used to be the water capital. It was not a city anymore. It was a lake with architecture in it. Rooftops broke the surface at random intervals, like teeth in a broken jaw. Whirlpools spun between the gaps where streets had been. Debris drifted in slow circles. The storm cell overhead threw no light through the clouds, and the water below was the color of clay. Sierra put on her headphones. She closed her eyes. The rest of us waited. Tens of thousands of heartbeats, she said. Her voice was flat and professional. Under the water, in the gaps of debris, in the upper floors of submerged buildings, the survivors are numerous. I told the team the plan. We would dive. Lulu would seal the truck in a full airtight bubble. Beatrice would manage buoyancy. Sierra would navigate. Mina would handle the refugees we pulled aboard. I would drive and provide propulsion. Lulu puffed out her cheeks and blew. The bubble expanded from her palms, rainbow-skinned and enormous, until it wrapped around the entire Nova in a seamless pressurized shell. Only the ballast intake valve stayed open, per Vulcan's design. Bubble is good, Lulu said. I put the truck in gear. I told the team to hold on and made a brief joke about holding their breath inside an airtight bubble. Beatrice said that was not how physics worked. Mina laughed. Sierra did not laugh, but the corner of her mouth moved. The Nova rolled off the cliff edge and hit the floodwater nose first. The world outside the viewports went brown and then black. Lulu's bubble held against the pressure without flexing. Beatrice adjusted weight reduction in pulses, keeping the Nova level as the current tried to roll us. I superheated a column of water behind the truck, and the steam expansion slammed us forward. The Nova shot through the flood like a launched bolt. Visibility was zero. The high beams reached less than an arm's length into the murk. Suspended mud and debris turned the water into a wall. I heard Sierra's breathing change. It was subtle. A half-second gap between inhale and exhale that had not been there before. Then a second gap. Then her hands came off the headphone cups and pressed against her temples. The underwater sound was hitting her. Sound travels 4.5 times faster in water than in air, and it decays less. Every collapsed wall, every shifting piece of wreckage, every current shearing against every surface in the drowned city was reaching her at once. She was hearing the city she had been thrown out of as a child, and it was screaming at her from every direction. Her breathing shortened. Her shoulders drew inward. I could see the tendons in her neck pulling tight. Somewhere behind her closed eyes, a memory was running that none of us had been invited into. The day they put her out. I did not slow the truck. I did not soften my voice. I spoke to her directly, the same way I would call a heading during a storm. Sierra, in this water, the light your family worshipped does not reach. The high beams are useless. Beatrice cannot see. Mina cannot see. Lulu cannot see. I cannot see. In this mud, every one of us is the defective one. I let the sentence sit for one beat. You are our eyes. Lead us. Sierra's hands came down from her temples. Her breathing steadied. She did not open her eyes. She did not need to. I will pick it up, she said. She placed her hands back on the headphone cups and listened. Not to the chaos this time, to Nova's engine, the low, constant hum of the Stirling cycle that she had been riding inside for 9 months. She sent that hum outward through the water like a pulse, listened to the echoes that came back, and began constructing a 3-dimensional wireframe of the drowned city inside her head. Within 40 seconds, she was calling clear. Starboard 30 degrees. Debris field sinking. Beyond the debris, submerged clock tower, 3rd floor. Many survivors. Her voice was calm and precise. The navigator's voice. Hard to starboard. Slow ahead. I turned the wheel and the Nova responded. The Nova docked against the clock tower's 3rd floor window. Lulu extended the bubble into an airtight tunnel between the hatch and the window frame. The survivors on the other side were standing in waist-deep water on a stone terrace, roughly 50 of them, shivering and holding each other upright. Mina was the first through the hatch. She handed out rolls of her cotton to the coldest ones. The cotton absorbed the water on contact and generated warmth. Faces that had been gray began to show color. We loaded them into the cargo container in groups. I told each group the same thing. Kent Transport Flood Rescue. Destination safe high ground. Stay seated, keep the cotton close. They nodded and sat. Most of them were too exhausted to ask questions. Sierra was already calling the next target before the last survivor was aboard. 30 meters northeast, large rubble field. Behind it, flooded mansion, upper floor. She paused. The pause was less than a second, but I heard it. Air pocket, many heartbeats, strong magic residue. She did not say whose mansion it was. She did not need to. I steered the Nova through the rubble field. We reached the mansion wall and I fired a control controlled cavitation steam burst through the upper window. The stone cracked inward and the air pocket opened. The air pocket was small, a marble landing on the upper floor, maybe 4 paces wide, with the water lapping at knee level and rising. The emergency light inside was a dim blue glow from a magic lantern someone had managed to keep lit. It threw weak shadows across soaked tapestries and cracked plaster. 12 people, all of them in ornate robes, now heavy with mud and water. Their light magic was useless here. The mud scattered every photon before it traveled an arm's length. They had been trying to cast and failing over and over in the dark water that their clan had built a dynasty on controlling. Sierra stepped through the hatch tunnel into the air pocket. She did not pull back her hood. She did not say her name. "Kent Transport Flood Rescue," she announced. Her voice was flat and professional, the navigator's voice, stripped of everything personal. "Please remain calm. We will evacuate you to safe high ground. If you are injured, inform our medical specialist as you board. If you are not injured, please take a seat in the cargo bay and remain still." An older man at the front of the group straightened. His clan robes, once fine, hung from his shoulders like wet paper. His face was gaunt, and his eyes were red from the glow of the failing magic lantern. He was taller than the others, and the people behind him held their positions the way subordinates hold position behind a leader. The chief thanked her. He used the formal dialect of his clan, the kind of polished phrasing that costs nothing and means less. He did not recognize the navigator in the rescue uniform. His daughter had been a small blind girl when he put her out. The woman in front of him was taller, steadier, and carried herself like someone who had spent years being trusted with other people's lives. Sierra acknowledged the thanks with the polite formality of a stranger. She gestured toward the hatch. Mina helped them board. The chief walked past Sierra close enough to touch. He thanked her again, this time with a small bow. Sierra returned the bow at precisely the depth you would give. A paying customer you would never see again. I watched her in the rearview mirror as she climbed back into the navigator's seat. She did not glance at the refugee bay. Her hands found the headphone cups. Her posture had not changed, but her jaw was set in a way I had not seen before. The muscles along her throat were pulled taut. She was reading the heartbeats of every person in the cargo bay, and she knew exactly whose hearts were beating back there. "Next target," she said. 200 meters south-southeast. Residential block, 4th floor. 23 heartbeats. I turned the wheel. 3 round trips. 800 refugees packed into the Nova and delivered to the high ground island where the first wave of rescue boats had collected. The cargo bay was at physical capacity. The oxygen balance was at its margin. Mina's cotton was nearly exhausted. The bubble was holding, but Lulu's face was flushed from the sustained effort. Sierra told me we could not take more. The weight and the air supply were at their limits. I was about to surface for the final time when Sierra went rigid in her seat. Her hands pressed the headphones flat against her skull. Her eyes, always closed, squeezed tighter. She tilted her head the way she did when something enormous was moving at the edge of her range. "The source of the flood," she said. "It is waking up." A tremor ran through the water around the Nova. Not a current, a displacement. Something vast was rising from the deep mud below us, and the water was moving to make room for it. "The water dragon," Sierra said, "directly below, ascending." The dragon broke the surface like a reef emerging from the ocean, tens of meters long, scales the color of deep riverstone, catching the last amber light from the storm-split sky. Its eyes were blue-white, and they glowed with the cold luminance of something that had never needed to see by borrowed light. It opened its mouth, and the roar hit the Nova's hull like a physical wall. Beatrice moved immediately. She climbed to the upper hatch. Lulu sealed the gap around her body against the water pressure. Beatrice drew the orichalcum greatsword, reduced its weight to nothing, and swung. The blade crossed the gap between the hatch and the dragon's flank at supersonic speed. In air, the strike would have cracked a fortress wall. In water, it did not arrive. The fluid resistance caught the blade at the midpoint of the arc and bled the velocity away. The edge connected with the dragon's scales at a fraction of the kinetic energy the armor required. The scales did not crack. The blade bounced. Beatrice pulled herself back through the hatch. Lulu sealed it behind her. The water poured off Beatrice's armor in sheets. "I cannot overcome it," she said. Her voice was tight. "The water steals everything. My strike will not reach." I told her not to worry. In the water was the weapon. I superheated a column of mud directly behind the Nova. The steam expansion fired the truck forward like a cannon round, straight under the dragon's belly. Sierra called the heading. "Port aft, high-pressure water breath incoming. I juked left. The dragon's blast carved a trench through the flood behind us and missed the nova by meters. Avoidance confirmed, Sierra said. Her voice was the same calm register it had been since she recovered. Continue diving. Under the belly. The abdominal armor is thinnest at the midline. The nova went deeper. The dragon's shadow covered us like a ceiling. Sierra navigated by the echoes of its heartbeat, calling corrections in quarter-second intervals until the nova was directly beneath the softest point on the creature's underside. The truck stopped. I told Beatrice to hold us steady and climb to the upper hatch. Lulu sealed the gap around my torso. The water pressed against the bubble skin, and I could feel its weight on my shoulders. Above me, less than an arm's length away, was the dragon's belly. The scales here were thinner, paler. They pulsed with the slow rhythm of the creature's circulation. My bare hand went against the scale. This was the first time in the arc I had used my magic on a living thing. Objects were my domain. Iron, water, air, stone. I heated and cooled the world's materials and left the world's creatures alone. But a dragon was not a creature the way a person was a creature. Its armor was mineral. Its scales were closer to geology than biology. And the thing above me had drowned a city of tens of thousands. Time for thermodynamics. The scale's temperature hit thousands of degrees in 2 seconds. The flesh beneath it heated explosively. Then I stopped. I pulled my hand back. The surrounding floodwater rushed against the superheated point, and the temperature dropped in an instant. Thousands of degrees to near freezing in less than a heartbeat. Thermal shock. The same physics that cracks glass when you pour cold water on a hot pan. The dragon's abdominal armor fractured in radial patterns outward from the point I had touched. The flesh underneath ruptured along the stress lines. The dragon thrashed once, a single convulsion that displaced enough water to rock the nova sideways. Then it went still. Its body began to sink. The blue-white glow in its eyes dimmed and went dark. The nova surfaced, the bubble peeled away as Lulu exhaled, and the evening air hit my face for the first time in hours. The storm cell above the basin was breaking apart. Gaps of amber light fell through the clouds and hit the water in long columns. Sierra reported that the unnatural currents had stopped. The water sources the dragon had been generating were gone. The city's natural drainage was taking over. The flood was receding. I drove the nova to the high ground island where the rescue operation had collected the earlier waves. The cargo doors opened. 800 refugees stepped out onto solid ground. Some of them fell to their knees. Some of them walked forward without looking back. Mina stood at the door handing out the last of her cotton to anyone who was still wet. The mage clan disembarked with the rest. 12 people in ruined ornate robes, walking carefully across the mud, blinking in the evening light, like people who had forgotten what the sky looked like. Sierra stepped down from the cabin. The searchlight caught her face as she turned to check the hull for damage. She ran her hand along the Nova's side panel, the way she always did after a long run, feeling for vibrations the rest of us could not hear. The chief saw her face under the light. His eyes changed. I do not know what he recognized first, the angle of her jaw, the way she tilted her head, the shape of a girl he had put out of his house, now older and steadier, and standing next to a machine that had just saved his life. He dropped to his knees in the mud. The clan members behind him watched. Some of them knelt too, slowly, as the recognition passed through the group like a wave. He apologized. He said he had been wrong. He told her that her power was extraordinary, that her ability was the key to restoring the clan, that she could come back, that the next chief's seat was hers, that he would make it right. The words poured out of him in the same formal dialect he had used to thank a stranger 10 minutes ago, except now the polish was cracking, and underneath it was something raw and selfish. Not a father who missed his daughter, but a leader who had just discovered that the thing he threw away was the thing he needed. Sierra rested her hand on Nova's chassis. The metal was still warm from the engine. She looked at her father, briefly, the way she would look at any face in a rescue debrief, the way you look at someone whose name you do not need to remember. I decline, she said. The chief started to speak again. Sierra did not wait for him to finish. My place is already decided. Her voice was the softest it had been all day, not cold cold, not sharp, not performing the refusal for anyone watching, just quiet and complete, the way a door sounds when it closes on a room you are never going to enter again. My place is only where this comforting heartbeat sounds. She rested her palm flat against the Nova's hull. The engine was idling, the low hum of the Stirling cycle, the same sound she had used as her active sonar pulse, the same sound she had been riding inside since the day I handed her a water bottle in an alley and called her crew, vibrated through the metal and into her hand. She meant the truck. She meant us. She did not say that. She did not need to. She turned away from her father. She did not look at him again. She climbed into the cab and settled into the navigator's seat and put on her headphones. The chief was still kneeling in the mud. The clan members behind him stood frozen. The searchlight threw their shadows long across the wet ground. I climbed into the driver's seat. I put the truck in gear. "Where is the next client?" Sierra asked. Her voice was calm. I told her. The Nova rolled off the high ground island and drove into the receding water toward the road north. The water capital basin fell behind us. The storm clouds were breaking apart, and the last amber light of the day hit the truck's windshield and turned it gold. Sierra, in the navigator's seat, was already listening for the next heading. The Nova's engine ticked itself cool in the bay outside, and the silence that followed was the kind you only notice when you have been living inside a diesel rumble for weeks. Mina and Lulu were already sprinting laps around the lobby, playing tag between the supply crates like the water capital flood had been somebody else's problem. I dropped onto the lobby sofa, felt my spine decompress against the cushion, and let out a breath that had been waiting since the dive. Sarah finished writing a number in her ledger. She closed the book, came around the counter, and stood over me with her arms crossed. She had a question, she said, a simple one. When was the last time I enrolled those two in school? I waved it off. Reading, writing, arithmetic. I taught all of it on the road. Mina could calculate thermal coefficients faster than most guild clerks. Lulu could estimate container volumes by eye. They were executives of Kent Transport, and the job itself was the best classroom I could give them. Sarah did not raise her voice. She told me I was a first-rate transporter and a third-rate parent. The lobby went quiet. Even Mina stopped mid-stride. Sarah kept going. She named it plainly, locking 2 children in a truck for every waking hour, dragging them through battlefields and flood basins and frozen seas, calling it employment. That was not education. That was child labor. What children needed was friends their own age, adults who were not their guardian, a world that was not measured in cargo tonnage and delivery deadlines. She reached into her account book drawer and slid a pamphlet across the counter. The Royal National Magic Academy's 1-month short-term trial enrollment. She told me she had been holding it for 2 months, waiting for me to come home in one piece. I picked up the pamphlet. I read it twice. I realized with a slow and ugly clarity that I had not thought about compulsory education a single time since the day I knelt in that alley and offered 2 starving girls a job. I thanked her, plainly, no defense, no excuse. She was right, and I had been wrong, and the only thing to do about it was fix it. I called Mina and Lulu over. I told them they would be doing a month at the academy. Mina's face crumpled. Lulu grabbed the hem of my coat. They wanted to stay in the truck. Sarah crouched to their level. She promised them friends their own age. She promised sweet dessert at the cafeteria every single day. She described the campus garden and the dormitory bunk beds and the fact that there would be other children who liked to run and shout and play exactly the way they did. The bribe worked. Lulu's eyes went round at the word dessert. Days later, I pulled the Nova up to the academy's main gate. The campus stretched behind iron railings, stone towers, manicured lawns, carriages with gilded crests lined up along the drive. I fussed over the supplies one last time. 5 sets of stationery, 3 backup pouches of compressed cotton, 2 long-range communicators. I pressed the smaller communicator into Mina's palm and told her the frequency was locked to my cab. If anything went wrong, I would be there before she finished the sentence. Mina laughed and told me I worried too much. Lulu saluted and promised to study hard. They walked through the gate. Their backpacks were almost as tall as they were. The courtyard swallowed them in 3 steps. Elite students glided past in lacquered carriages. I heard the whispers through my open window. Country bumpkins, dropouts, cotton and bubble life magic rejects. The same garbage skill language that a drunk adventurer had used in an alley a lifetime ago. Mina and Lulu walked through it without breaking stride. I watched them until the courtyard gate closed. My jaw tightened. I put the Nova in gear and drove drove out of the academy district with both hands on the wheel and a quiet promise in my head that those elite children should hope they never learned what happened when they angered my executives. The weeks that followed taught me what a 30% efficiency drop felt like. Sierra reported road vibrations transmitting straight into the cargo bed. Without Lulu's airtight bubbles, the cold air leaked at every seam. Beatrice confirmed the cooling loss from the rear compartment. I opened the cold cellar and pulled pallet after pallet of pre-made compressed cotton and preservation bubbles. Mina and Lulu's accumulated month of magic, stored before they left. The consumables held, barely. Vulcan lay under the Nova's chassis with a wrench and an opinion. She told me the company relied too much on those two. Then, she adjusted the suspension damping until the vibration transmission dropped by 40% without a single spell. She crawled out, wiped her hands on her coveralls, and told me not to underestimate engineering. The team held together. The kids came home each weekend with stories. A classmate who could grow flowers from stone, a cafeteria dessert called cloud pudding, a library with more books than Frozen Station had crates. I listened and refilled their cotton pouches and said nothing about the whispers I had heard at the gate. Then, one Friday evening, Mina sat on the lobby sofa and told me the Academy's wilderness survival training started the next morning. Several days in the mountains. No coming home. My stressed stomach activated on the spot. I asked her what supplies the Academy was providing. She said the teacher told them magic would handle everything. I said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then I told her to be careful and reminded her that fire alone could not fill a stomach. After she went to bed, I walked into the workshop and stockpiled 6 more pallets of compressed cotton. I did not sleep well. The survival training cohort assembled at the foot of the mountain trail the next morning. I was not there. I am telling this the way Mina told it to me later, and the way Sierra's long-range audio confirmed it. The lead teacher stood at the front of the line and gave a speech. Magic knelt nature. Fire erased cold. A true mage needed nothing but his wand and his will. The elite cohort cheered. Behind them, at the very back of the line, Mina and Lulu carried packs taller than their shoulders. Inside those packs, waterproof ponchos I had sewn from treated canvas, 6 vacuum thermoses of hot tea, 3 each, double-walled with Lulu's vacuum seal and Mina's cotton insulation, holding heat without a single point of monocost, high-calorie pemmican rations, a foldable cotton bivouac kit, layered cold-weather inner garments I had stitched by hand on a Tuesday night when I could not sleep. Mina looked at Lulu. Lulu looked at Mina. Mina quoted me quietly. An army that neglects logistics defeats itself before the battle. The elite students wore lightweight academy uniforms and carried empty satchels. Fire magic would handle the rest. They walked into the mountains. 40 minutes in, the sky collapsed. A record downpour hit the ridge like a wall of cold water. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 10 minutes. An unseasonable cold wave riding in behind the rain. The trail turned to mud. The wind turned horizontal. The lead teacher ordered the cohort to fire up. Wands came out. Sparks flickered. Small, wet, pathetic. The rain's cooling capacity overwhelmed every fire spell the students could produce. The physics were simple and merciless. The latent heat required to vaporize the incoming rain mass exceeded the thermal output of every wand on that ridge combined. The Academy had never taught that equation. Uniforms soaked through in minutes. The first students showed hypothermia symptoms within half an hour. Slurred speech, loss of motor control, terminal shivering that would not stop. The lead teacher's own ornate wand produced nothing but a thin curl of smoke against the deluge. His knees hit the mud. Around him, the elite cohort dropped one by one, curling into themselves on the wet ground, too cold to hold their wands. Under a rock outcrop 15 paces from the trail, Mina and Lulu sat in their waterproof ponchos, sipping hot tea from vacuum thermoses. Dry, warm, calm. Mina sighed. She told Lulu that at this rate, by tomorrow, the whole class would be frozen solid. Lulu said she was worried about everyone. It was unbelievable that they did not even have snacks. Mina capped her thermos. She stood up. She told Lulu it was time for the warm-up operation. Lulu jumped to her feet. Her eyes were bright. They walked out into the rain and crossed 15 paces to the collapsed cohort. Mina announced, loud enough for the whole ridge to hear, that she was going to build a shelter, and everyone who could still move should crawl inside it. The lead teacher, on his hands and knees in the mud with his useless wand propped under him like a cane, opened his mouth. He looked at Mina's face. Whatever he saw there, the calm, the competence, the complete absence of panic, made him close his mouth again. Lulu raised both hands. She spoke one word to her magic and cast all-around seal. A giant airtight bubble inflated outward from her palms, curved over the entire cohort, and sealed itself against the rock face with a low hum. Rain hammered the exterior and slid off. Wind hit the surface and split around it. Inside, the air went still. Mina stepped forward. She cast layered filling. Thick, high-density cotton surged from her hands and coated the inner surface of the dome in concentric layers: floor, walls, ceiling, leaving 3 precise ventilation holes at the apex. She spoke to the lead teacher the way I speak to a client who has not read the shipping manifest. The best insulator, she explained, was still air, dead air that did not transfer heat. The airtight bubble stopped convection, the cotton stopped conduction, and the trapped body heat of more than 20 people at roughly 37 degrees would warm the dome interior to above 20 degrees within minutes. No fire required. Standard thermodynamics. Uncle Kent taught it on a Tuesday. The temperature inside the dome climbed. 5 minutes. 10. The shivering stopped. Color returned to faces. Students uncurled from the mud and sat up blinking in the warm air, looking at the cotton walls as if they had woken up inside a cloud. The lead teacher was in tears. He told Mina and Lulu, and his voice broke twice getting through it, that he had laughed at their magic and called it worthless, and that he was the most incompetent person inside this dome. Mina did not gloat. She nodded once and told him that everyone was safe, and that was what mattered. Then she reached into her pack and pulled out the long-range communicator. She pressed the call button. My voice came through from 20 kilometers away. I told her Sierra already had their position locked. Mina's face split into a grin. She told me the whole cohort was inside the dome, and they were warm, but there was no food, and the teacher was a mess. I told her I would deliver in 5 minutes. Wait there. The lead teacher stared at the communicator. He asked, to no one in particular, whether anyone could really cross a storm like this in 5 minutes. Mina tucked the communicator back into her pack. She looked at him with the cheerful confidence of a 10-year-old who had watched me drive through a sandstorm, a blizzard, a frozen sea, and a flooded capital. She told him he should not underestimate the strongest delivery man. Lulu added that Uncle Kent always delivered on time. Sierra's sonar mapped the destroyed mountain road through landslide debris and flash flood gullies in real time. She called out terrain data the way she had called it through the flooded water capital: calm, precise, treating the record storm as a routing problem. Beatrice held the weight reduction steady, keeping the Nova's tires above the mud instead of buried in it. I drove. The road had been a road an hour ago. Now it was a river of gravel and broken trees. I threaded the Nova through gaps Sierra found in the landslide walls, over exposed bedrock ridges, around a collapsed section where the mountainside had simply given up and slid into the valley. The storm hit the windshield so hard the wipers were decorative. I drove by Sierra's voice alone. 5 minutes after Mina's call, the Nova's headlights cut through the rain and found the cotton dome glowing faintly against the rock face. I pulled alongside it and killed the engine. The work lights came on. Lulu opened a precise delivery hatch in the bubble, a rectangular section that peeled back like a loading bay door and sealed itself behind me the moment I stepped through. I was dry. I carried a steam-fogged thermos of hot stew heated by the Nova's exhaust system, a basket of fluffy bread still warm from the engine block oven, and an armful of thick, dry blankets. I announced flatly that Kent Transport had brought a delivery. The elite cohort stared at me. 20-odd students, mud-caked and red-eyed, sitting inside a cotton cloud on a mountain ridge in the middle of a record storm, watching a man in work clothes walk in dry and carrying lunch. I set the thermos down and opened the lid. Steam rolled out. The smell of hot stew filled the dome. They ate. Some of them cried into their bowls. The bread disappeared in seconds. The blankets went around the smallest students first. Mina directed that without being asked. The lead teacher, still on his knees, thanked me through clenched teeth. He called me carrier. He tried to explain. It had been an unforeseen situation. Their magic should have been sufficient for any difficulty. I looked down at him for 3 full seconds, told him I did not deserve thanks. I had done my job. Then I asked whether the elite way was to enter mountains unprepared and put students in danger. The life magic of my transport company had saved lives, while his fire magic could not stop the rain. Any teacher who could not keep his students warm had no business taking them above the tree line. He could not answer. His chin dropped to his chest. Then I turned to Mina and Lulu, a hand on each of their heads. They were excellent. I was proud of my executives. Mina pressed her face into my coat. Lulu wrapped both arms around my leg. The elite students watched in silence. Nobody mocked Cotton and Bubbles. The dome held for the rest of the night. The rain did not stop until dawn. Morning came golden. The storm broke apart over the eastern ridge and left the sky washed clean. Rescue carriages from the academy rolled up the trail, carrying warm soup and dry uniforms. The cotton dome was dissolving in the sunlight. Mina had released the layered filling, and the cotton drifted apart like dandelion fluff, leaving only Lulu's bubble shell shimmering in the dawn air. The elite cohort lined up in front of Mina and Lulu. Every one of them. They formed a straight row in the mud, still wearing blankets over their ruined uniforms, and bowed. The bow was deep and held. The student who had led the gate day mockery stepped forward. He apologized formally on behalf of every elite student present for laughing at their magic at the school gate. He said, and his voice cracked on the word, that without their magic, every person on this ridge would have frozen in the night. He called their magic the most wonderful in the world. He bowed again, lower than before, and held it until Mina told him to stand up. Mina smiled at him. She told him it was fine. She told him everyone had survived, and that was what mattered. Then a carriage with the academy crest pulled to the front of the trail. The headmaster stepped out. He was an old mage, white-haired, straight-backed, dignified in the way that centuries of institutional authority produce. He walked to the remnants of the cotton dome and ran his hand across a section of insulation still clinging to the rock face. He examined the ventilation holes. He traced the seal line where the bubble had met the stone. He turned to me first. He thanked me for the delivery. Then he turned to Mina and Lulu. He thanked them directly. He told them that the environment construction magic they had demonstrated was unprecedented in the Academy's centuries of history, and that he must reflect on how biased the institution's fire supremacy doctrine had been. Then he made the offer: a full Living Magic Special Student Scholarship, tuition, room, and board. A curriculum reform built around environment construction magic. Mina and Lulu would be the Academy's first recognized non-combat specialists. The offer was genuine, and the old man's eyes were sincere. I looked at Mina. I told her the choice was hers. If she wanted to go to this school, I would support her fully. There would be no dangerous deliveries, no storms, no floods, a normal education, a normal childhood. Mina looked at me. Lulu looked at me. Then they looked at each other, and something passed between them that did not need words. The same look they had exchanged in the alley the day I found them, and on every delivery since. Mina turned to the headmaster. She bowed politely. She thanked him. She told him that studying had been fun, and making friends had been wonderful. Then she straightened up, and her smile went wide and warm and completely without edge. "Our school is inside Uncle Kent's truck," she said. "Uncle Kent teaches us thermodynamics and logistics and atomic diffusion welding. The Academy does not teach those things, and Uncle Kent is the best teacher in the world." Lulu stepped forward. She stood as tall as a 6-year-old could stand. "We are employees of Kent Transport," she said. "Going home with our precious family is the greatest happiness." The ridge went quiet. The elite students stared. The lead teacher, still on his knees in the mud from the night before, stared. The headmaster looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I met his eyes and said nothing. His mouth curved into a wry, defeated smile. "I concede," he said. "Family bonds and knowledge gained through real combat are more attractive than any magical authority. Your executives are too excellent for my academy." He bowed to me. I did not bow back. I had spent 12 phases declining to bow to establishments that had ignored or hurt my family, and I was not about to start now. I put a hand on Mina's shoulder and another on Lulu's. I told them it was time to go home. The company had a mountain of work piled up. Mina cheered. Lulu cheered. They ran toward the Nova. Sierra reported from the navigator's seat that the elite cohort's heartbeats sounded clear and grateful. She said Mina's and Lulu's heartbeats were the calmest she had heard from them in a month. Beatrice opened the cargo door for the sisters. Mina climbed in and hugged Beatrice around the waist. Beatrice went stiff for exactly 1 second, then put her hand on Mina's head the way I always did. Lulu scrambled up after her and asked what the next cargo was. I started the engine. The Nova's familiar rumble filled the cabin, and I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in a month. Behind us, through the rear camera, I could see the headmaster watching, the elite student leader watching, the lead teacher still kneeling, watching. The Cotton Dome's last wisps drifted apart in the sunrise like confetti after a parade nobody had planned. The nova caught the morning sun on its silver and gold body and rolled down the mountain trail. The road ahead was clear. The sky was golden. Mina was telling Beatrice about cloud pudding. Lulu was asking Sierra if she could hear the cafeteria dessert from here. Sierra said she could not, but she could hear that Lulu's stomach was growling and everyone laughed. I drove. My back ached. My stressed stomach was finally quiet. My two youngest executives were home, and the truck was full again, and the road ahead was open, and that was enough. That had always been enough. 3 weeks after the girls turned down the scholarship, a sealed letter arrived at Frozen Station bearing the royal crest. I read it once, folded it into my coat pocket, and told the team to pack formal clothes. The Nova rolled through the capital's polished stone streets for the second time in the arc of this company's life. The first time we had come here with a frozen dragon on our flatbed and a supersonic dent in the king's favorite statue. This time, we came clean, fueled, and on schedule. Citizens lined the boulevard and pointed at the silver and gold hull like it was a parade float. Beatrice sat in the throne seat with her spine so straight I thought her vertebrae might fuse. The audience hall was enormous. Vaulted ceilings, tall windows throwing gold across the marble, high officials lining the side galleries like painted furniture, and a public viewing balcony packed shoulder to shoulder. The king sat on his throne at the far end with his hands folded. We walked the center aisle, Beatrice to my left, Sierra to my right, Mina and Lulu a half step behind. I heard Lulu whisper that the floor was shinier than a soap bubble. The king spoke. He named our work, the Sand Corridor, the Frozen Reunion, the Fire Dragon Transport, the Goldwyn Affair, Iron Geo, the Sky City, the Fortress Siege, the Water Capital Flood, the Academy Storm. He said our reach had surpassed the domain of any single courier. He said the crown recognized it. He granted Kent Transport the royal warrant, formal royal recognition, plus exclusive logistics rights to every major continental highway. Beatrice's breath caught beside me. She whispered the words under her breath, royal warrant, and tears pooled at the corners of her eyes before she blinked them away. Mina's eyes shone. Lulu bounced on her toes. Sierra smiled the quiet smile she saved for moments she could hear the room change pitch. I did not bow. I accepted the parchment without changing my expression. The warrant was paper. The company was work. The work was already done. Then, the audience hall doors slammed open hard enough to crack plaster. A wyvern filled the entrance. Silver armor caught the window light and threw it across every face in the hall. The rider sat the beast like he had rehearsed the entrance for a week, one gauntlet on the reins, the other braced on a great shield bearing the crest of the Beast Transport Guild. Garrison, ace of the largest aerial logistics organization on the continent. He told the king that the warrant could not be given to commoners wielding garbage life magic and operating a mysterious iron block. He said Wyvern Dragon Knights had carried the continent's logistics since the founding of the kingdom, and that the proud carriers would not surrender their privilege to people without combat power. I had heard this speech before. Gray gave it in a guild hall. The commander gave it in a fortress. The chief gave it in a flooded mansion. The academy teacher gave it on a mountainside. The words changed. The shape never did. I looked at Garrison and told him that flying was fast for a bird, that logistics was not flying, that the work was not how fast you moved, but how you delivered, and that the Beast Transport Guild had been a flying postal service, mistaken for a logistics empire for 100 years. His face went the color of his wyvern's throat. The king watched the confrontation and proposed a settlement, a race. Both parties would carry an identical prism glass bottle to the Cliff City Zenith at the continent's western edge. Fastest delivery with intact cargo took the warrant outright. The king wanted the Beast Transport Guild to accept the outcome, so the empire's logistics transition would be politically clean. The race was the legitimization. Garrison accepted condescendingly. He said the sky had no rocks and no turbulence. He said he would fly elegantly while I crawled in the mud. I accepted in 2 seconds. I told him I would teach the flying lizard the essence of logistics. 3 days to prep. That was more than enough. Race morning. The royal courtyard had been cleared and fenced into a starting plaza. 2 stone pedestals at the center, each cradling a prism glass bottle under a velvet cover. The officials unveiled them at dawn. The bottles were arm-long crystal vessels, thin as eggshell, refracting the early light into rainbow shards on the cobblestones. The examiners explained that prism glass cracked from the vibration of a carriage wheel on cobblestone. A single jolt, a single rattle, and the crystal was finished. Garrison's wyvern unit lined up on the airside runway. 4 beasts in formation, their scales throwing off heat like furnaces. The Nova parked at the groundside road exit, engine idling, exhaust condensing in the dawn air. I gave the packing orders. Lulu, airtight bubble around the bottle. Fix the air column inside so it cannot shift. Lulu's palms came together. A shimmering soap sphere the size of a melon enclosed the crystal without touching it. The trapped air locked into a single rigid column. Mina, 3 layers of high-density cotton around the bubble. Impact absorption. Mina grinned and clapped her hands. Pink cotton unspooled from her fingers in sheets so dense they felt like compressed foam. She wrapped the bubbled bottle layer by layer until the package could have fallen off a roof without flinching. Beatrice, strapping belts. Zero out every millimeter of play. Beatrice placed her palm on the cargo container's fixing straps. Weight magic pulsed once. The slack vanished. The package sat inside the container like it had been welded there. On the radio, Vulcan confirmed Nova's suspension was at top tuning. She had adjusted the damping remotely the night before and told me if I damaged her settings, she would remove my kneecaps with a ratchet. The king raised the signal flag. Garrison mounted his wyvern. He smirked across the courtyard at me. His beast crouched, wings folded, muscles coiled. The flag fell. Garrison's wyvern launched into the sky like a ballista bolt. 4 beasts in tight formation, punching through the dawn air, turning straight west on the shortest linear route over open valleys. The crowd roared. Every spectator in the stands was already writing the headline, "Dragon Knights win without contest." I started Nova's engine. I turned south. The crowd went quiet. Then they booed. The valley road wound south and then west through unpaved cliff terrain, twice the straight line distance, and the road was a mess of gravel, ruts, and switchbacks that would shake a normal cart to kindling. I did not respond. I shifted into third and accelerated off the cobblestones onto dirt. Sierra put on her headphones and began calling the road by sound. Rock bulge, port side, 100 meters. Depression of 20 centimeters at 150. Ridge debris at 200. Hold the line 30 centimeters right. I threaded the Nova through her callouts at speed. The truck bounced on unpaved gravel hard enough to rattle the cab. Beatrice gripped the armrest and stared at the rear view monitor that showed the cargo bay's interior. A single cup of water sat on top of the cargo container's surface. It had not rippled. Beatrice's mouth opened. She asked how the cargo could be motionless when the cabin was shaking hard enough to blur her vision. I told her once. Vulcan's suspension physically absorbed road shocks at the axle. Mina's cotton converted residual vibration into heat energy at the container wall. Lulu's bubble isolated the internal air column so the glass could not rattle inside its own atmosphere. And Beatrice's weight fixation on the strapping canceled the last millimeter of inertia play. The cargo bed is vibration-free at any speed on any surface, I said. If delivery quality is already perfect, then the only question left is speed, and I intend to go fast. I put the accelerator to the floor. The 99 curves appeared around a rock shoulder like the spine of something enormous, hairpin after hairpin carved into the cliff face, each one a 180-degree reversal with a sheer drop on the outside edge and raw stone on the inside. The road was wide enough for 1 truck and 0 mistakes. I did not brake. Beatrice screamed. She told me I could not make the turns at this speed and that we were about to go over the cliff. Curves are not for turning, I said. They are for sliding. Sierra's voice came clean and flat. First curve in 300 meters. Right-hander. Entry in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now. I pushed temperature manipulation into the road surface ahead of the front wheels. The moisture in the gravel froze in 1/10 of a second. Friction coefficient dropped to near 0. The Nova's rear broke loose and the truck drifted, the entire 20-meter hull sliding sideways toward the cliff edge at over 120 kilometers per hour, with the engine screaming and the tires printing ice crystals across the rock. Centrifugal force slammed the cab hard to the outside. The outer wheels lifted. For 1 second, the truck was a coin balanced on its edge. Beatrice, now, heavy inside. Light outside. Her hands flew. Weight reduction magic hit the outer wheels and stripped their effective mass to almost nothing. The centrifugal pull on the lighter side dropped. The inner wheels, still at full mass, bit the road and dragged the center of gravity back inward. The Nova slammed level. At the exit of the curve, I melted the ice. Friction returned in a flash. The tires caught dry gravel, and the truck launched forward with an acceleration that pinned all 3 of us to our seats. Sierra called the next curve. I froze the entry. Beatrice shifted the weight. The Nova drifted, and again, and again, and again. 99 hairpin curves on a cliff face at 0 friction drift. Sierra called each entry by echo timing. Beatrice shifted the gyroscope on every reversal. I froze the road at the mouth and melted it at the exit, and the truck danced through the switchbacks like the cliff was a racetrack built for it. In the cargo bay, Mina and Lulu sat cross-legged on the container lid. Mina was drinking juice from a straw without spilling a drop. Lulu was holding her cup out at arm's length and giggling because the surface was perfectly still, while the walls outside the window blurred with speed. The whole run took less than 9 minutes. 99 curves, 0 braking, 0 cargo movement, 0 fear in the eyes of the 2 children sitting on top of the most fragile object on the continent. 2,000 meters above the open valley, Garrison's Wyvern unit hit the updrafts. The valley floor was baking in the morning sun. Hot air punched upward in invisible columns. The formation shuddered. The lead Wyvern's wings caught a thermal pocket, and the beast lurched sideways hard enough to snap the riders against their harnesses. The cargo net on Garrison's saddle jolted. Inside the net, the prism glass rattled. A hairline crack opened on the bottle's neck, thin as a spider's thread, barely visible, but there. Garrison looked at the damage and his face went white. He ordered the entire unit to descend and decelerate. The Wyverns dropped to a lower altitude, slowed their wing beat to half, and limped westward at a fraction of their cruising speed. He had just learned what every ground logistics operator already knew. Living creatures had no shock absorbers. The sky was not smooth, and speed without control was a postal service, not a transport company. The Nova exited the last curve onto a flat plain that stretched to the western horizon. The ground was hard-packed clay, smooth as a mirror, shimmering with heat. Sierra tilted her head. She reported the Wyvern unit's wing beats at high altitude, decelerating, uneven, stressed. The distance between us and the Wyverns was shrinking fast. "They are no longer ahead by much," she said. "At current rates, we will be alongside within minutes." The final straight. Zenith's cliff face was a dark line on the horizon. "Beatrice, reduce vehicle weight by 10%. She acknowledged and placed both palms flat on the dashboard. Weight magic pulsed through the frame. The Nova shed mass like dropping a coat. I shifted into top gear. The Stirling engine's exhaust manifold ran hot after the 99 curves, hundreds of degrees of waste heat pouring out the rear vents. In a normal truck, that heat was gone forever. In the Nova, it was fuel. I pushed temperature manipulation into the exhaust stream and concentrated the thermal energy into the Stirling cycle's hot side exchanger. The engine's efficiency curve bent upward. The pistons fired faster. The drive shaft spun harder. The speedometer needle climbed past every number it had ever seen. The same technique I had used to deliver the fire dragon to the capital. The same physics. The same trick that had made a 42-year-old temperature mage break the sound barrier on a public highway and earn a bill for the Emperor's cracked statue. The Nova hit 300 kilometers per hour, then 400. The air around the truck compressed and the hull began to frost. Moisture flash freezing against the surface as the boundary layer collapsed. The sound barrier broke with a single clean clap that echoed across the plain. The exterior frosted white. The heat shimmer ahead split open as the shockwave carved a corridor through the air. The speedometer needle buried itself past its limit and stayed there. Garrison heard the boom before he saw the source. He turned in his saddle and looked down. A silver and gold streak was crossing the plain below him at a speed that made his Wyverns look like they were hovering. Frost trailed from the hull in a white contrail. The shockwave flattened the heat shimmer in a widening cone. He could not believe it. He said as much. The words came out broken and thin. a crawling iron box overtaking flying wyverns. The Nova passed beneath his formation in seconds and kept accelerating toward the cliff face. Garrison's hands tightened on the reins. He looked at the cargo net beside him. The cracked prism glass sat inside it like a verdict already written. I braked using thermal differential and Beatrice's weight restoration. Heat pulled from the wheels, mass returned to the frame, and the Nova decelerated from supersonic to a dead stop in the polished examination plaza without leaving a mark on the stone. Sierra took off her headphones and exhaled. Beatrice unclamped her hands from the dashboard. The examination plaza was carved into the western cliff face of Zenith. White stone walls, open sky, a row of officials in formal robes standing behind a long table. Mina popped the cargo door from the inside. Lulu jumped down after her. They both looked perfectly rested. The examiners approached the Nova. I opened the cargo container and stepped aside. Lulu peeled her airtight bubble away with a soft pop. Mina unwound the high-density cotton in layered sheets, each one still warm from vibration absorption. Beatrice released the strapping. The prism glass sat on the container floor, flawless. Not a scratch, not a rattle mark, not a hairline fracture. The rainbow refraction caught the noon light and threw it across the examiners' faces. They inspected it in silence for a long time. Then, the lead examiner nodded and recorded the result. Minutes later, the wyverns descended into the plaza. The beasts were breathing hard. Their riders slumped in the saddles. Garrison dismounted and walked to the examination table on stiff legs. He unwrapped his cargo with careful hands. The examiners leaned in. The hairline crack on the bottle's neck was visible to everyone in the plaza. The lead examiner recorded the damage. He turned to the assembly and declared the race won by Kent Transport. Garrison knelt on the polished stone. His silver armor rang once against the ground. He bowed his head and admitted defeat. The word came out quiet and dry and final. I walked past him. I stopped for 1 second. I did not raise my voice. Speed alone is not logistics. Delivering entrusted cargo in perfect condition, no matter the environment. That resolve and technique are what you lack. I did not wait for a reply. I turned back toward the Nova. Beatrice had already climbed into the throne seat. Sierra was adjusting her headphones for the trip home. Mina was reorganizing the cotton pouches. Lulu was looking for leftover juice. Days later, the formal royal certification arrived at Frozen Station in a wax-sealed envelope carried by a palace courier who looked terrified of the oil stain on the lobby floor. Kent Transport, royal approved, indefinite continent-wide logistics monopoly. The parchment was thick enough to stop a knife. I read it, folded it, and put it in the Nova's glove box next to the stomach medicine. A delivery contract for the next morning was already on Sarah's desk, somewhere south of the capital. A merchant needed temperature-controlled cargo moved across a mountain pass by noon. Standard rate, standard route, standard Monday. We were loading the new cargo when Beatrice paused with a crate halfway to the bed. She tilted her head toward the long-range communicator mounted on the cab wall. Master, both Sarah and Vulcan are on the line. They sound agitated. I flipped the speaker switch. Sarah's voice hit the cabin like a slap. What royal warrant? There's a mountain of next orders piled up here, and you are still out there playing race cars. Get back to the station and start running deliveries, or I am docking your own salary. Vulcan's voice cut in before Sarah finished. And do not forget, it is time for Nova's oil change. At the current usage rate, the pistons will seize inside of a week. I swear, if you bring that engine back with burnt rings one more time, I will weld the ignition shut. Beatrice covered her mouth with one hand. She looked at me with the particular expression she reserved for moments when our base crew made the royal court look informal. Both of them are making quite the fuss, she said. Sierra smiled. She did not add anything. She did not need to. Uncle Kent! Mina leaned over the cargo bed railing. What is the next cargo? Lulu popped up beside her. Lulu wants a cargo full of snacks. I sat in the driver's seat. The engine was warm. The delivery manifest was clipped to the dash. Sarah was still yelling about the backlog. Vulcan was still yelling about the oil change. Beatrice was shaking her head. Sierra was listening to something only she could hear in the hum of the engine. I put the Nova in gear. The silver and gold truck rolled out of Frozen Station's loading bay onto the road. Morning sun hit the hood and turned it white. The highway stretched east toward the mountain pass and the first contract of the new era. Behind me, in the cargo bed, Mina was already calculating packing density, and Lulu was already inflating a practice bubble. Beatrice sat in the throne seat with the manifest open on her knees. Sierra had her headphones on, listening to the road before we reached it. On the radio, Sarah and Vulcan were still arguing with each other about whether the oil change or the backlog was the more urgent crisis. They had not stopped since the line connected. I suspected they would not stop for the rest of the company's natural life. The warrant was in the glove box. The continent was in the contract stack. The stomach medicine was in my coat pocket. The team was in the truck. The work was never about the warrant. The work was the company. The company was the team. The team was the family. And the family was already on the way to the next delivery.